This is striking gold for the AGL CSS 10K. Tell me where that was again.
Atlanta,
Atlanta.
Georgia.
Atlanta. All right, cool. Um, so first things first. Congratulations to both of you. Boss
Appreciate it.
here, 5-0-3, so an undefeated record as far as I'm concerned. I take draws as wins, and James here got a 2-0-3, so he also did incredibly well. Was it 2-1-3?
Should have been 2-1-3.
My mistake. And see, we can edit live. Fuck it,
Do
we'll
it
do it.
live.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll take my loss proudly.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, let's hop into the deck lists or deck list differences first of all. Um, we're gonna start with Brandon's. It's Brandon, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Brandon
Just making sure.
Boss.
So there's a huge number of differences here, and so I'm gonna do my best not to linger on any one thing too long, but we're gonna do some roundup of some of these cards. So I'm seeing fetches first of all.
Yep.
So how do you feel about fetches? What with all of the I would say that the community line, or at least the Nomicon line, is that fetches deck thinning doesn't matter, but Oppo matters. What makes you want them?
Yeah, this one for me is really easy. If if an opponent is going to use their Oppo to basically strip mine me, go for it. I can then use my removal to get rid of the Oppo. I would much rather it be on a fetch land, which has never happened to me, versus an activation. And the fetch lands also fuel the graveyard. For a long time, I've been testing Mines of Moria. I tried Barbering for the tournament this week. But it's just really difficult for us to get like that threshold in our graveyard for some of these graveyard matter cards to be significant. So I've never had an issue with Oppo. I think that's just kind of blown out of proportion.
So the reason I ask is not because I'm worried about the gotcha moment of people, you know, blowing their load early and trying to get you on a strip mine, right? What I'm worried about more is that, your 5 cards or so, 4 to 5. I can't see how many you're on.
Mhm.
You're on
He's
All
on
four,
every
five.
yes.
fetch that he can
Yeah.
run.
Yeah,
Yes.
including Vista.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah. So 5. Um, that's a fifth of your lands or so that if you top deck them with Oppo out, if you're locked under an Oppo, you're no longer making lands effectively.
hmm
So that's actually what I'm more worried about. Is that not been a concern to you?
Like I said, I mean, I've been doing it for, I think it was back in November when I started running fetches, and it's just never happened. I'm not saying that it won't, and obviously the one time it does, it's going to really suck. But when we get into the interaction that I have, it's primarily all removal, and the removal is really saved for Tranith, which really doesn't get played a ton, Oppo and Bowmaster. And again, like I totally understand, but for me, like I'm really trying to hit my land drops turns 1 through 4. Oppo's not always out super early in the game. So it just hasn't come up. I certainly understand if someone doesn't want to play it, but I really see the value. I really would love to find a way to make Mines of Moria work. I think it's better than Barbarian Ring, but I think there's just opportunities to use cards in our graveyard a little bit more than we, historically have. And fetches, I think, are just an easy way to do that. We don't care about our life total. I never worry about it.
Right.
So yeah, so that's kind of why I picked them.
I'm. Yeah, I think we're probably 1 or 2 cards away until like a lands. Utilizing our graveyard mattering
Mm-hmm.
as a functional card advantage avenue.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're probably a couple cards away from that. Let's talk about stacks pieces now. I'll get the ramp afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
I see Uba Mask. How's that been working for you?
Uh, it's funny. That's the one card that my local play group back home gave me the hardest time over. I've tried testing it. It was always a little awkward, but when it worked, it was good. It really like we're gonna talk about it. Most of the stacks I'm running, and in a tournament setting, when you're sitting down across from a stacks piece that you are not familiar with winning through, it really messes people up, and they will start doing things that are just not optimal. And the Ristic Mystic, absolutely, we've got to shut down the draw engines. There was multiple rounds in this tournament where all three players had draw engines, and I'm just sitting there, But also, we're going to talk about Bowmasters. It shuts Bowmasters down. There's some reasons to run it. It easily can get cut. It probably will get cut for the tournament I'm going to play in this upcoming weekend. But I came into the tournament expecting to see mostly TNT, blue farm, and a lot of draw decks, and so that's why I ended up giving it a shot. Um, but I totally understand if someone looks at it and goes, "This card's bad. You should not be playing it."
Sure.
You didn't see it in the tournament, though, did you?
I didn't see it in the tournament, and I guess I should also mention this. I was getting a ride to the venue, and there were some decks I wanted to kind of shore up on, and Rog Thras was one of them. And again, I'm getting harassed by my buddies about this card specifically, Uba's Mask, and I'm reading about Rog Thras on Commander's Herald, Sam Black's list, and just call it a coincidence or whatnot, but the first article that pops up on Commander's Herald talks about how Draneth is a bad card and people should not be playing it. And I thought to myself, that's it. It's meant to be. I'm running the card, and so be it. And you're right. Never saw it, so it doesn't really matter. But I still think it's incredibly powerful, and I think it could really throw people off of their win lines.
All right.
Draneth in the current meta, though, like because so many of these decks they get a lot of value from Tymna, right?
Mhm.
So in those early situations where Draneth is coming out, most of these decks don't have quite the breadth of like single target removal unless
Mhm.
it's a bounce spell. Some of them are on like Deadly Rollick and stuff like that, but it's few and far between. So like Draneth does quite a lot in the current meta. So like I understand why some people say it's a bad card, but
Mhm.
it also just like hoses so many situations that your opponents like are planning to be like, I'm gonna do this, 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 set up my sort of draw engine for my Tymna, play my Tymna. Oh, I can't do that no more.
Yeah. So you're totally right. I I know people are going to say this is crazy. Um, there's been a lot of people talking about opposition agent the same way as Draneth, and that it just does not advance your game plan of trying to win the game. And I think as these mid-range decks get greedier and greedier of trying to outvalue one another, they start to look to cut cards that don't progress their win plan. And since Jewel Lotus has been banned, I again, my personal take is that I think Draneth Magistrate is just a bad Magic card for these mid-range draw go decks, or Tymna value engine decks. And I didn't see a Draneth the entire tournament.
It's definitely
So
one of those cards where like if it's in your opening hand, it's gas, right?
mhm.
But when you're going into the mid game, it's not nearly as good.
Yeah, if I saw Elevere or Plagon, like Uba's Mask is a card that if you're gonna play, and I'm gonna make this point probably more times than I need to, stacks are difficult to play. You have to know when to play it, and if you're going to play it, you need to know your plan if something goes wrong. So I would not blindly jam an Uba's Mask, knowing that there's a deck that potentially has access to Draneth's Magistrate, if I didn't at least have a plan or make sure that someone else had a plan for it.
Like
So I think
already
that's really
having
important to
removal in
mention.
hand or something.
Exactly. You can't just play it and say deal with it, because then they go Vamp Tutor, Draneth, GG's.
That's how we approached it when we were playing Mask, because we knew that was the danger. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
because we were in a Jeweled Lotus meta, people were already getting their Timnas out, which means they were drawing their tutors, which means they were tutoring their Draneths. It was very very hard to not turn the game into a 1v3 with from a really bad position. It's different now, I suppose. The cards on the downswing. Let's talk about more stacks pieces.
Yeah.
Karn. I see Karn Lattice in there. How has that come up? How was that for you?
Yeah, here's my take on Karn. I saw him at least 2 games. He probably would have got played one of them. It might have been 3 games. Every time I had him in my hand, I wanted to play him. The board state didn't allow for it.
It's like, okay, I'll play a card for him to die. Great.
Yeah, exactly. So my thought was this might be like, again, depending on the matchups, it could certainly be great to lock it down, like lock down artifacts. And then if I was able to like get a sneaky Mycosynth activation or even a hard cast for some odd reason that I could get there, I thought it might be great. It just didn't work out. It was bad. There's like, for instance, one of the things is I would look to get rid of Mycosynth probably pretty soon, but I think Karn might be okay with Stridehanger coming out and us having a bunch of 2/2 flyers that can just sit back and block. But for the tournament, it was bad. Easily one of the most underperforming cards that I saw more than one time.
I mean, in argument to that, like the chance of you having both Karn and Stridehanger is very low. So like,
Yep.
if that's your only way to protect him, which in our deck it basically is, I don't think it's good enough. Like at least in the current meta, where like so many decks are playing Tim the X, and he's just going to die. Like he
Totally
might not
fair.
even make it like past the first person after you play him sometimes.
Yeah, I will not defend Karn, but Joe, I think you would remember this. I'll tell you guys right now, up until the Thursday before the tournament, I was convinced that I was going to run a list that had Null Rod in it. I think that card is so incredibly powerful, that effect, that if you can build just like if you could look to have maybe 8 ways to get rid of the from up under the Null Rod yourself, I thought it was worth running. I opted to not run the Null Rod, and I kind of said, you know what, I'll do Karn then, and I'll kind of settle for it because not being able to play artifacts is just brutal for so many decks, and especially if it's one-sided and we get to play ours. So I thought it was a risk worth taking. It didn't pay off, but again, risk you take.
It's funny that you mentioned the number 8 because when Rust was here, he was trolling me about playing Curse Totem. And I was like, mathematically, if you were on like eight removal pieces, like you could technically play it, man. And he's like, oh. And then he starts like counting stuff out, and he's like, I can use my fancy demand answers and get to 8. And I'm just like, Rust, please no, don't do it.
All right, so I hear what you're saying, but here's my take on that. If if we're playing Curse Totem and there's a blue farm deck in the table, they are saying thank you.
Exactly.
I there's just no like I can Null Rod. I really liked it even when Dockside was around because there were just some really nasty things you could do.
Oh, yeah.
I still think it's that good, but the problem is as we shift into Aether Drift, the need for vehicles, especially in the creature heavy meta, you really just can't take the risk. But I love that card, and again, it wasn't until late Thursday night where I go, I've got to get off this card. I've got to get rid of some of these like the welder pieces that I was playing. I had like Torch the Tower in my list. I was really trying to like stretch it so that I could get up from underneath it and still like really kind of oppress my opponents with the different pieces.
So let's move to the taxing pieces.
Yeah.
Sphere of Resistance did very well for you in this tournament, but regardless of how well that does, how has Sword of Amethyst been performing for you? Because it's funny that you tech these cards into this mid-range meta, because when thinking about this sort of a metagame and talking to a lot of other players, both locally and online, in this Discord as well, like Kinnan decks and Thrasios X decks both play very well into these particular stack pieces. So like with them being a very large percentage of the overall tournament meta, like upwards of 25%, it's difficult for me personally to think that these cards can like impact those decks enough to where they're worth playing. And like you said, you're going to continue to say, knowing when to play the stacks is really important. But if you have these cards against those decks, it's almost like being down a card in hand sometimes.
Yeah, so that's how I feel particularly about Trinisphere. I don't like Trinisphere. I played it, didn't see it, and we can talk about that later. And regarding Sphere, there were 2 pods that I played in with Kinnan. Both times, once in the semifinals and once in Swiss, I had a bolt in hand. Jace might have thought it was for his Magda. It was for Kinnan. I play against Kinnan back home. I'm very used to seeing turn 1, turn 2 Kinnan. I know what it can do, and I was not going to allow that to happen. At least, with the hands I was trying to keep. So, we'll save it for when we get into the rounds. But I again, you have to think about how it's going to sequence out, how seed order is going to work. But Kinnan aside, Kinnan Thrasios aside, I'm going to go ahead and really focus on stacked pieces around stopping win conditions. Just for a moment, think about it's happened and it's interesting to watch. Sitting across from a player that's trying to do breach lines with the Sphere of Resistance out, or even a Thorn of Amethyst, because I see them both kind of as the same card, obviously different, but regardless, if one of those effects are out and my opponent's trying to breach, and he's in a tournament setting and he's really trying to make sure everything's tight and he's doing the right lines, they struggle if they're not comfortable with doing it. And it can honestly just give you that extra turn or two to get you to the amount of treasures you need to jam the win. So again, I said it when we were going back and forth in the chat earlier today. No one of these stacks pieces am I going to play and say, all right, I feel safe, I can win the game. You've really got to think about how you layer the different effects, and that's going to come out in the card choices that I picked all the way across the the different CMCs. But that 2 mana Thorn Sphere effect is I just love it so much. For 2 mana I play Sphere. For 3 mana I'm playing Magda, right? And that's usually how it ends up working out. One of the rounds I got just the nuts when it came to stacks effects, and my opponents genuinely did not play Magic the entire round. That's magical Christmas land, but when it happens, it feels great.
It's the same thing as the old like null rod into Magus of the Moon, and your blue farm player just goes, do I have Dockside? Nope, pass. Do I have Dockside now? Nope, pass.
Mm-hmm.
But moving from those, let's talk now about Chalice of the Void, because that's a card that still functions with those in play, whereas something like a Vexing Bubble doesn't.
Yeah. So interesting enough, the very first time that I ever really thought about the Nombo interaction between Vexing and some of these stacks effects was the tournament that you were at, show up in Boston, the 2K.
Mhm.
And I was playing in the semifinals, and I thought to myself, oh, I'm gonna play this Sphere because I'm going for the win. This was right at the very end of the game. I'm gonna go for the towards the end of the game. We were in untimed rounds. I'm gonna play the Sphere. That's gonna take them off. Just a little bit more. It'll take them off their mana. And I'm going for the win attempt. The Sphere of Resistance made the Mog salvage playable when I thought my opponent was just completely cut off. If it wasn't for the untimely malfunction, I don't know if I lose, but I definitely don't win in that moment. And it really made me hyper aware of my reliance on staxing effects and interaction that stops free spells. So after that, I started kind of just brainstorming and thinking around okay, if I want to get off of Vexing, what are some other cards that I could run? Or I should actually go backwards. This was when I came to the conclusion of cutting Chrome Mox and Lotus Petal. And I'm like, if I'm coming off of all of these effects, all of a sudden I don't have that many 0-drops in my deck. I haven't always been on Mox Diamond or Mox Amber. So Chalice of the Void looks super appealing if you're not playing Lotus Petal, Chrome Mox, and some of these 0 CMC spells. And then when you factor in how it doesn't Nombo with Vexing Bobble's interaction with the stacks pieces, it makes it really good. And the moment that it was solidified for me, where I'm playing in play testing back home, very turbo heavy meta, Roxai, Timnarog, just these really degenerate decks that are trying to get out from underneath you before you can do anything about them. I played Chalice this playtest game. Play Chalice. My opponent goes, "I'll cast Rog." He's just thinking, "I'm gonna cast Rog, and then I'll play it for 2 when it gets back around to me." And I'm like, "No, it's someone had to tell him you're not gonna be able to play that again. Don't cast that." And all of a sudden, you just see the look on his face, and he's like, "Well, I'm kind of screwed right now. I can't do Culling the Weak. I can't do Infernal Plunge. I can't abuse this thing that's made Rog one of the best commanders in the game." So early game, it's great because it stops the fast starts with the Chrome Moxes, the Mox Diamonds, etc. based on seeding order, which is important because you don't want to just jam it out if 2 other players have gotten a really fast start. But even in the late game, just putting the Chalice on 0, again, really makes it difficult for breach lines and some other things. So it's got utility throughout the game. I know not everyone's going to want to play it, but if you're not running Chrome Mox and you're not running Lotus Petal, I think you should certainly think about it. And it's been a really powerful effect for me. I didn't see it in the tournament, but I feel strongly about keeping it in the 99.
The fact that it stops breach lines is probably the most important part of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Yep.
mean, most breach lines, because you can still do the grinding station plus mana vault shenanigans,
Yeah.
but that's not in every deck.
Yeah, show like this is the thing. Like we talk about the stacks effects about really stopping the early game. The early game just gives you some time to breathe. It's nice, but I really care about not losing. And like
Right.
these effects, all of them, whether it's Uba's Mask, Sphere, and Thorn, Dampening Sphere, Chalice, they really make it difficult for the common win lines. Thassa Demonic is a different story. I opted completely to remove Torpor Orb, but with that being said, all the other win lines, it's really, really difficult to go through these different effects. And I'll give you an example. I play Friday night. I play Chalice on, I think I'm seat 1 or seat 2. I play it, and the guy next to me looks at me, and he's just like, damn, he shows me his hand. And he's got 3 0 CMC cards, or sorry, 2, and then he was playing Rog, and he's like, I'm just out of it now. Like I can't play Magic because you kept a really, really greedy hand, and you were just going to try to jam the pedal. So it can really mess people up.
So I have a question about that because that's something that's like a gameplay philosophy thing, in terms of what you want your stacks to do.
Mhm.
And I think a primary consideration when jamming stacks is, am I giving 1 or 2 players an outsized ability to break parity under these stacks pieces, while player C can't play the game if I just lost an ally rather than removing a threat, or like how often am I removing the person that might have had a counterspell had they been able to develop, right?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's again why it's so difficult playing stacks. Is you have to think about how you expect the game to play out, what you need your opponents to be able to do to one another, and it's like why another reason I don't like Vexing Bobble. If you don't have that 1 mana up, which can be really tough, and you need an opponent to force of will something so that we don't lose the game, you're gonna feel really bad that you were the reason your opponent couldn't stop somebody else from winning. And it comes up more than you believe because all of the different flares, force of neg, force of will, pact, and like all those cards. Although Chalice would stop pact, it's just really really relevant. And I don't want to play any stacks piece. As I just got done talking about Null Rod, I don't want to play any stacks piece that's so impactful that an opponent feels they absolutely have to counter it. And now you can make the argument Blood Moon and Magus are up there, but I've never at any point had Sphere of Resistance countered. They just look at it and go, all right, that's going to be mildly annoying. And then when they try to get to winning, it's like, it's going to really gonna suck. But I don't want to play the you can't play Magic cards for the most part. I'm trying to just make it so that you've got to play, a little bit slower, maybe a little off sequence, not as efficient, but you can still play Magic.
In Swiss, do you find that your opponents, when they're under Sphere or Thorn, are still just developing without much care for their need to cast a free spell that now costs 1 mana?
So I'm gonna take that question and ask a question because I know how annoying that might be.
All right.
When people are trying to play and there's a Rhystic Study out, do they always pay the Rhystic Study tax?
No,
Like,
that's kind of the
yeah,
point I'm getting. I would say
yeah.
75% of the time they're jamming, and the thing you're not trying to do with the Vexing Bauble, which is basically on when you want it to be, off when you need it to be.
Mhm.
Sphere is always there, and unless your opponents play in the way you want them to be, which is to say disciplined, because you want the game to, you're here for a long time, not a good time.
Yep.
You are effectively setting up the circumstances in which your opponent had to choose between development and disciplined play, and now they are without the 1 mana to counter the necessary spell. Does that make sense?
Sure. No, it makes perfect sense, and I think that's just like anyone that's played stacks, or people will say play stacks, your win percentage goes down. Um, if you're going to play stacks, you've got to not only understand how to play the cards, but you've got to also know how to talk to your opponent so that they know what's coming and how it's going to sort of play out. I won't say I do that perfectly, but I probably, excuse me, am more proactive when it comes to talking about, threat assessments, sequencing, things we should be worried about, just kind of just keeping just a general like temperature of where the game's at.
Sure.
And if somebody's going to do something and I know it's a mistake, and I will give you an example when we get into the later rounds where my opponent was basically advocating for a player to kill the Magus of the Moon, which would essentially just give Kinnan the game as soon as I pass the turn. I'm like, all right, stop. We've got to have a conversation. Does anyone have an answer for Kinnan? And I look at both of the guys and they go, no, we don't. Well, if you're going to do that, someone has to be able to deal with that. So I'm going to need you to at least let me get an activation or a search. And they'll go, all right, well, that makes sense. Right. So you can leverage it sometimes to your advantage. Not that it happens often because people hate Magda getting to 5 treasures. But there can be times where you're going to politic and say, okay, well, do this. If you let me swing, get a few extra treasures, and when we get to an activation, I will get this piece. Or you can again politic for what that's going to look like. But you've got to be proactive, and again, that's why you can't just slam any stacks piece and say, your turn. So yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. I agree with it. For the most part, CDH players are greedy, and they will just jam and they want to advance their board state. But if there's a threat on the table, and the stacks piece isn't, again, hitting everybody sort of equally, it just creates problems where you can just hand the game away, and that's like the worst feeling in the world.
Yep.
I will
Stacks.
say,
Go.
like in my local meta, there are a lot more responsible players where they treat Ristic Study more like a stacks piece, right?
Mm-hmm. That's what
Where
it is. I agree.
right. But in regards to Thorn and Spear, and to a higher degree even GPS, with this mid-range meta that we're in, where Ristic, Mystic, etc. Well, specifically Ristic, because no one ever pays for Mystic
Mhm.
really. Having these taxing effects removes their ability to pay for like
Yeah.
anything 3 CNC or above from being from not feeding Ristic Study.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
So
that's a great. Oh, sorry.
it makes it a very awkward situation, because then your stacks piece turns into, I don't know, 5 or 6 cards sometimes over like 2 turn cycles, if not more, for that one player, and it can just put them ahead.
So it's interesting you mentioned that. Round 2, that situation happens, where there's a Ristic study from seat 1. It's an Agila player, and I play Sphere of Resistance, and player 4 looks over to me and says, "Hey, there's a Ristic out. Can you hold off on playing the Sphere?" But my intention was to follow the Sphere up with a Blood Moon effect. So I said to myself, I'm willing to risk this because I think that the Blood Moon will cut the Nagila player off, and it will be worth it. He ended up, of course, he actually was the player that ended up countering it, and that game ended up being a draw. But it was certainly something that I had to decide. It wasn't just I'm playing Sphere no matter what. I had to again ask myself, like, is this worth him getting 3 more cards before I can play the Blood Moon? And again, he countered it, but if he didn't, and then it ends up really cutting him off of all his mana, and he can't really. You can draw all the cards you want. If you can't play them, it doesn't really matter. And these greedy 4-color, 5-color decks, Blood Moon can just hand you a game sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, so that situation that you just described absolutely came up, and it's certainly something you've just got to be aware of when you're playing some of these pieces.
So like that to me is another thing that, like you said, you have to consider. But when this meta revolves entirely around that, like there comes a point where if you're not seeing Sphere in your opening hand and playing it on turn 2 before the Ristic Study comes down, that like that decision point of, do I play this Sphere here? Again, can often turn that card into just, okay, this is a Mox Diamond in my hand without another land. Like
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, this card does nothing for me. It puts my opponents ahead. This sucks.
Well, and show here's the thing. So that Brown that I was referencing, it was 2 turbo players and a blue farm player. I cared more, like my thought wasn't Sphere is going to stop them from progressing their board. It was I need to stick this card now so when they try to win, I'll be able to do something about it. Because Mycosynth Garden was the other land I had on the battlefield. So I was essentially seeing it as a almost a God Sparrow statue, for everybody. At some point I was going to copy it when they tried to Chain of Vapor it or get rid of it.
Yep.
So to me it was like, all right, I'll let them draw, but I also have two blue players in the deck that can control the one Ristic player. So that was another thought that went into it. And I'm like, I'm just going to have to say that you guys are going to have to deal with him. I'm going to try to play responsibly. And I paid my taxes for the most part. And I just said, if it was only one, maybe I don't do it. But certainly with the two, I felt comfortable enough. One had an Esper Sentinel out and the other one ended up getting his draw engine out. And we're just sitting there. I'm sitting there watching three players draw a ton of cards and not win the game. When the two look at each other and they show ad nos, and I go, well, can you win through a +2 effect? Like, okay, I'm not going to win this game, but you guys certainly aren't either. So we can figure it out, or we can just call it. So just another decision line to think about when you're, especially when you're mulliganing. But when I see two turbo decks and a blue farm deck, blue farm can't stop both turbo decks. And I saw Sphere in my hand. And I go, I think Sphere on turn 2 is going to be impactful enough to where I need to keep this hand.
Absolutely. And I think like this is the situation that you're going to run into in some tournaments, especially if you feel like Turbo is coming back in a way where you're just like, okay, well, I need to stick this to survive, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's perfectly fine. But also an interesting thing that you mentioned was Mycosynth Gardens. And I think that the only variant of Magda where Mycosynth Gardens make sense is the variant that plays these taxing effects because otherwise Mycosynth Gardens basically reads pay 1, turn it into a soul ring, and if or pay 0, turn it into a mox diamond or a mox amber or whatever, and like it's not great.
Yep, I completely agree. I think before I was playing hard stacks, I copied a soul ring once, and my other thought was it could potentially save a Clock of Omens for some odd reason. But again, not really relevant. I had cut it for a really long time, but I'm only ever looking to copy those really cheap stacks effects, and that's kind of something else that we could potentially get into. There's a lot of synergy in the deck, like for instance, like Workshop and 3 CMC artifacts, and like everything is like I try to be really intentional when I'm deck building. Not that I make all the best choices, but I went into the tournament expecting to play certain types of decks with certain cards that I was worried about, and I had a specific game plan that I went into. Like my strategy was lay low at the table. I'm not going to jam anything unless needed. And I every single round for 7 rounds I played just kind of laid back. And it really does you wonders when you're not, with an artifact dwarf on the table, 3 treasures, and then you've got 3 players going, we can't let it get back to his turn. We're going to do everything we can to stop you. I kind of get frustrated when that's the line always. So I try to find ways to work around that. And there's, again, stacks effects are a good way of, helping you, buy some time, lay low, and then when other players get more threatening, people start worrying about them, and then you can do your thing. And by the time that's happened, you can get the win attempt.
All right, we've spent a lot of time on the deck list. I think that Shop and City of Traders make a lot of sense. You have a lot of need to come out fast stacks pieces that you need to dump on turn 1 or 2. So this makes a lot of sense. I don't think we need to go into that. I want to pick a couple of cards that we have left and talk about them individually. Gimli, how did you like it?
Okay, so Gimli, since I started playing the deck, has always just like overperformed for me all the time. Of course, there's certain windows where you can't run them out. Pre Dockside, the Mana Crypt, Gimli into Magda was just like the nuts. But there's been times where I'll go Axguard Cavalry, play Gimli, tap, give him haste, swing in, and all of a sudden I'm at 5. And for our opponents, like players that don't fully understand the ins and outs of Magda, like they can count to 5. They can figure out, all right, well, he's got the potential to get to this number. Playing cards like Gimli, Great Train Heist, and some other ones can really just help sometimes just say, I'm going to get there right now, and you thought it was going to take me another turn.
Sure. So segue.
And then again,
I want to talk about Great Train Heist. How many gotchas did you get this tournament?
Only one, but that card like I went into it a little bit earlier today. The floor is what it is, but the ceiling is so high that you can't see the roof. Like that card, for 1 mana, obviously it's not one, but for what it is, it should be played in every variant of the deck. Again, it can just be a "oops, I win" button, and that quite literally happened when I should have lost that round. So I think every version of the list should be on Great Train Heist. It's a great card. A lot of different uses for it as well, but you've got to be smart about how you play it. And when we talk about that round, I will give you an example because just having the Great Train Heist did not guarantee the win, and I don't want to spoil it, so I'll save that for later.
So, Ragavan, have you been connecting?
No. So Ragavan's always one of those cards that I'm just looking to cut. It's the synergy with Relic of Legends. It's the synergy when you play Ragavan on one and then you cheat out a Tangle Wire, like, or you go Ragavan Magda Tangle Wire. Like sometimes it can just be so useful early game. Or again, like Relic, it really works out with some other synergies that it's good. When I was on Mines of Moria up until the week before last, it was another legend to have, but I'm not convinced it needs to be played. I think I just took it out for the list I'm going to try to play this weekend. So that's it.
Last card, Delayed Blast, has been having the. Have you been killing the things that you needed to kill in that moment, and has the extra value been worth it?
Absolutely. This is a one-sided board wipe that kills Timna, Kinnan, Magda, Sisse. It kills so many relevant to toughness creatures. It can wipe dorks. It can wipe dwarves. It just gets rid of a lot of stuff. And every time I've played it, again, you could have a a bowmaster out. Like it's just really really good. And the fact that it's instant speed is just what really sets it off. I think it's one of those cards that we have to play. You don't have to, but I think it's again, it's so useful in this creature heavy meta where if you don't have a vehicle out and you need a player to attack, that's the card that can help you get through.
It's kind of a pseudo vehicle in that sense.
Yeah. Again, like think about all like we don't need to go down the list, but like what are all the commanders that really really matter right now? Delayed Blast probably takes care of 80% of them on its own.
Yeah, it's really Thrasios that it's not hitting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fair enough. All right.
There's two cards that you're not running specifically that I want to ask
Yeah,
about.
let's do that.
Number one is Torpor Orb. You mentioned that you took it out and that you're just sort of conceding that Thoracle is a thing. However, based on conversations that you and I have had, and you keep talking about Bowmasters, Torpor Orb solves the ETB from Bowmasters, and that's one of the easiest ways for us to get blown out. And the fact that it also just stops so many things like Ranger Captain's ETB, like there's so many different things that just happen when things enter, like Spellseeker, it shuts down Inala.
Mm-hmm.
What is
So
your thought process for like giving that up?
yeah, so here's my take on that, and I think I may have made this a little like I've kind of been working this in here. I'm really like the incremental value. So for instance, Ranger Captain getting an Esper, that's great. They're going to draw some cards, a lot of cards probably. I don't want to lose the game, so the only ETB that I'm like really really worried about is Thassa, and that's sort of it is what it is. And there's times where I've had Torpor in my deck probably majority of the time I've been playing Magda, but I cut it for this event again just because I was worried about some other things. The ETB from Bowmaster, I, I don't like Bowmaster as a card, but if it just came in and it just did 1 damage, I really wouldn't care about it. Yeah, you killed Magda, I'll recast it. I care about casting Bowmaster, killing Magda, and then killing my other 2 dwarves on the battlefield.
Right.
Like that's the problem. I don't removal is not a problem. Getting blown out is a problem. So this is one of those things where when I first started playing Magda, like Memory Jar was like it wasn't really a thing, but it was an option. So when you're playing in a table and like let's say someone's threatening Thassa Demonic, and you can potentially politic to get up to 5 treasures. And you're like, well, if I get to 5 treasures, he can't Thassa's Demonic because Torpor Orb's a card. I'm not saying I have Torpor Orb, and that might be a little deceptive, but now all of a sudden he's got to go, well, damn. I can't just jam this because if he activates on top of me and grabs Torpor Orb, then I'm blown out. So it's just like when people will say, "Hey, do you have interaction?" I'm saying, "I'm sorry, I'm mono red." Like it doesn't mean I don't have interaction, but it means you shouldn't be counting on me for it. So I think there's some times where you can be a little bit, again, maybe misleading is the right word to call it, but it's really just trying to be strategic and understand the circumstances that you're in. Thassa's is the one card that I kind of accept that it exists, and if I lose to it, I lose to it. Kind of hope that someone else at the table has an answer.
It's risky to me.
Yeah, yeah.
What was the other card you wanted to talk
understand.
about?
So the other thing, Drew, that you have to think about is that this is something that the server and especially myself have been talking about a lot recently, is that if you are tutoring defensively, you're getting a draw or you're letting the other player win the game. And if you're letting the Thassa's Oracle player win the game regardless, because the other opponents like have another win line that's not Thoracle, like they're just gonna be like, okay, yeah, you go get that Torpor Orb so that I can win on the next turn. And you're just like, well, that's not how this is gonna work. I'm gonna get this Torpor Orb since you guys don't have an answer, and then we're gonna draw the game. And if we
Yeah.
don't draw the game, then I'm not doing this and they're winning anyway.
Yep.
So that's a great point, and I will say the deck was somewhat constructed, and we're not going to talk about this right now, but the deck was kind of built with the idea that you would win with one activation. That's why you're playing like Bloodline Predator and some of these other cards that typically don't get run. I think I saw an Artifact Dwarf every single game, and won because of them. I didn't need to go tutor 3 or 4 times or activate 3 or 4 times. I was just able to say like I'm going to activate right now and either like get portal and the game's kind of just reset and I've got time, or I can just go grab the clock right now. I've got enough extra treasures, so there's protection on top, and then I can just keep going.
And so like the way that I look at your list is that it's, in a sense, Gustavo's list just adapted very slightly to not completely be off of Battered Golem and stuff. Kind of like what he was on probably like 6 months ago, before he took that out again and went Masquidless. That's sort of how I looked at your deck, was that it's definitely a hard stacks variant more than it is like turbo stacks.
Yeah, and it's funny. I had taken out the Battered Golem Maskwood Blood Boiler for a bit, not for any tournaments. At least I don't think so. But I was playing it at FNM, and every Friday I usually change 10 to 15 cards just so people don't get super accustomed to what I'm doing. But I had the Battered Golem Maskwood combo in, and I'm playing against what was it, like a Blood Pod deck where we got wheeled a couple times, and all of my pieces. I mean, Portal, God Pharaoh, all those cards were in the graveyard, and the clock got 8 as well. And I'm going, I don't know how I'm going to win this game, and was able to like get there with Maskwood into Blood Boiler and just all of a sudden win a game that I probably should not have. So I think you've got to have some plan. It doesn't have to be Batter Golem Maskwood, but going into Stride Hanger, Maskwood's such a good card that I think you just say I'm willing to use like Batter Golem is a potentially dead card, but Blood Boiler has value. It's a tapper. It's a dwarf. And
It's also
Maskwood is
really,
really good.
really, really good with Crime
Yes.
Magda.
Yeah. Yep.
It's kind of Sting in Crime Magda.
Yeah, not that comes up like almost ever, but in the games where you have that, you're like, I get 6 treasures this turn cycle. Ooh, baby.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
And people always say like the Blood Boiler, it's like, oh, it's the 3 red pips. And it's like, yeah, that's red pips in my land base is always an issue and something I'm aware of. I will use treasures to cast Blood Boiler.
Right.
That's that good of a card.
Yeah, and most of the time you're only using one treasure to cast it. So like you're using one treasure to cast it, you're tapping it, you're making the treasure that you use to cast it, and then you have a tap outlet. So it's like, to me, Blood Boiler is gonna stay in auto include almost forever.
Yep. And
All
I know
right.
we're going to jump off the list
Yeah, go for
real
it.
quick, but if I could just advocate for one card, I don't see it in nearly enough Magda lists because I'm not pushing Staxes on anybody. If you're not comfortable, don't play them. But everybody should be playing City of Traders. That card is nuts. It's something that has to be sequenced properly. And there's, again, what turn you never really play it on one, but there's times where I'll play it on turn two. Play two, float 3 mana. On the next turn, float the two, play the land, you sack the land, you've got 4 mana, and then you have three the next turn. So it's like, even when you lose it, it's the value is so important for getting some of these pieces out early that I really think everybody should be playing City of Traders.
I think now in the world of 3 mana of vehicles, like I'm not super interested in playing shop because I think that's a weird like sequencing tempo hit sometimes. But traders, after playing Lumira a good bit, has felt so good, and now that we're running more 3 mana artifacts just in general, it's even in the mid range. It was a stacks thing, and now I think it can be a mid range thing because we have Lifecraft and Barry too, the Thoptering. I think that's probably accurate. It's probably pretty good. We probably should consider what we're cutting for it. But I think
Let's
now
move to Jace's deck.
Yeah, Jace, you get to talk, buddy.
Nah, I was just listening. I'm sorry.
You're good, buddy. All right.
Look at those differences.
Yeah, no, it's half as many. Jesus, only I think 16 cards different. So what I'm seeing is a Thorn.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Thorn, Winter, Academy Man. Okay, so I want to talk about cards where I need to ask why. Like, I need to know why you're on Realm Scorcher still.
So my honest answer for that is I did not know the win line through going through the deck and then shuffling back in Twin Shot Sniper at all. Because I mean, I'm only a month into the deck, and the Scorcher was just something that I could have as like a backup plan in case that like somehow Twin Shot got removed or I couldn't get it back into play. It just kind of feels like a safe space for me. After knowing the line, though, I probably will end up cutting it.
Buddy, I will spend as much time as you want tutoring on all the lines and making you really comfortable. I never want to see that card again. And the fact that it was a dead card in your 99 and you still made it at the top.
It won.
Well, yeah, it does win. It does nothing else though.
Similarly, Elixir of Immortality.
Right.
So that one was really a situational thing because I had a game in where, my Bark Form Harvester was actually exiled away from me, and the Elixir was really the only other thing. So I like to keep like a second backup option. It's not terrible, especially after like I get board wiped and now I'm just getting targeted because people are in the CDH tuners like, why aren't you gonna hit dwarves? They don't, and I'm just like, I don't use my life, and they're just like, well, it's always better to hit someone,
So like that's the main reason why the main list and most players that aren't playing hard stacks play Pinnacle Monk is because it's a line that wins without like needing Elixir or anything like that. It uses Chaos Warp, it uses Leoa's Justice instead. But those things are like deck building considerations that still have upside. Like, Chaos Warp being ubiquitous removal and stuff. But you're still on a caddy manufacturer, which makes sense why you would be playing Elixir, not Elixir, Curse Mirror because of the lines for that.
So I guess the question I have is, how did the caddy manufacturer in 3 a.m., 2 a.m. work for you?
In the Academy Manufacturer was also just the other thing too, like where I could draw the things that I needed and then just be able to shuffle away things, getting the life. I don't think I really needed it. It's not been a thing that I did tutor. It did sit in my hand a lot of the times. I had it in like 2 games and it sat in my hand. I was just like, there's no point in trying to cast a spell. I could hold up interaction. Just didn't do enough.
Yeah, that's generally how we feel about it. And I guess bouncing off of that, is that Molten Dupe?
It is.
And yeah, Molten Dupe and Cursed Mirror. How are those working for you? What's interesting is you have Curse Mirror but don't have Engineer. So was Curse Mirror in just for the 3 AM lines, or were you just 3 mana dwarf effectively?
I do just want to clarify, what is the 3 a.m. line?
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah,
basically, what happens is that when you have one Academy manufacturer, it doesn't make you any extra treasures, right? When you have
Okay.
2 Academy manufacturers, it makes it so that you generate 3 treasures. 1 treasure
Mhm.
for each, like clue, food, treasure that enters, right? So you make the first treasure, and then it makes a clue and a food, which turn into a clue, a food, and a treasure, basically.
Mhm.
And then when you add a third Academy manufacturer, it turns it into 9 at a time.
Okay. Okay. I think I
And
understand.
then yeah, so like it's basically like the board state where you win with it is like 5 treasures, Academy manufacturer, 2 untapped dwarves, and a tapper.
Mhm.
And you activate, you go get your way to copy Academy manufacturer, so sculpting steel, cursed mirror, whatever. And then you tap your 2 dwarves, make 6, go get Maskwood Nexus, tap your 2 Academy manufacturers, make 6 again, go get something to copy Academy manufacturer again. Now you're making 9, and now you can tutor every creature out of your deck. And then there are ways to make infinite treasures, like by using or by looping Dwarven Scorcher with something like uh, Barkform Harvester, etc.
All right.
So
All right.
it's a relatively complicated line,
Mhm.
but it does let you win without clock of opens. So
right.
there's that.
But it requires 3 to 4 cards.
And it also, like, if you're comparing it to the new card that's coming out, that card only needs Magda out and a tapper, whereas
Mhm.
and 1 activation, whereas this needs a very specific board state. And the other problem with this win line is that you can just go for a roaming throne into Clock of Omens and then still win with the same board state in most situations.
Safer
Okay.
because of the ward.
Uh,
Safer.
arguable, but well, depends on if the people know the lines or not. Because Academy manufacturer lines are not really known, and at that point, it's too late.
Right. It's some brewer advantage stuff. That's true.
So
But
I guess the real reason why behind like mulch and duplication was just for the fact that, after already assembling like a good amount of mana and obviously treasures, you get like 3 to 5, and you have the ability to make a little bit more. Your opponents are always trying to figure out, you know, does he have it? Does he have the artifact dwarf? Can he get there right now? And multiple duplication sitting in my hand feels a little bit more risky than just instead running another artifact dwarf at like 2 or 3. Um,
because it is.
it really is risky, but I did, only being on Magda for about like a month and a half. I took 3 lists from the CDH database, and I was kind of like, I'm going to kind of grab cards from each one of these lists. And that's kind of how that card ended up being in here.
Sure.
Curse Mirrors stayed in for really funky things. Being able to be like drawing into it for a turn, and then somebody prior left a Grand Abolisher on the field, or like a Cutsoul coming from like an Agila or decks like that. Being able to Curse Mirror and not them knowing what I'm going to grab is going to be like a key thing that could potentially just lead me into a winning situation on my turn protected. It's also for like if I want to instant speed tutor, somebody's trying to remove a creature that's holding down the table, like say a Void Winner, and no one else has a way to protect it for the turn. I can tutor Curse Mirror, and I can make a copy of Void Winner, and now we can just sit in the situation where I already knew I wasn't going to win at that position, and I could make it to where we can kind of just head into that draw rate. And I mean, that's a terrible thing to think about, but I would rather have a point than a loss.
Yeah. No, I mean, I count like draws from losses are still value added, so you should always go for them.
Yeah, Jace, not terrible at all. That is a great way to think about tournament magic. It's not you, but that's the format that those are the set of rules that we have to work within. I'm not advocating for draws, but if I'm not going to win the game, I don't want to lose it.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So
Glasses of Urza.
yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about next.
How did that perform, or how has
I
that been going since you've been playing it?
That I actually added in about it was probably like a week after testing Magda and seeing all the lists. I was like, this thing's pretty interesting. And I was like, it's not like telepathy, it's a more of a one-sided telepathy. I get to, cast it. Like if I have Ancient Tomb, going like a universal automaton into the glasses, kind of like gives me that advantage to I do open up with the turn one dwarf. And now on your end step, I can have the advantage to look at one, and you're not really going to target this thing because it's not that threatening.
Right.
Like it just gives me the information. And with what I can do with the information, it kind of can give me the go sign for when I want to chase for something, or when I know I can be safe to just like throw down a God's Pharaoh statue or Trinus Spear. It really gives you those openings. And I think it was probably the MVP card for this entire weekend for me.
All right, that's cool. I saw an interview with I think it was Ian, or no, Ian might have just been looking at the top four for the Royal Rumble, and the Blue Farm list that was in the top four. Um, he ran it, and he said it was like one of the most important cards of the weekend. But
Yeah.
I think we came down to the conclusion of not running it, at least initially, because we can't afford to go down a card that is only a political tool for the or it's a political tool plus the green light. Sometimes.
Oh yeah. Well, to me, it's like if I draw it after an opening hand, draw it turn two, it's never gonna be terrible, And then if I see it even later in the game, and I'm already burnt out of resources, it's not just gonna be a bad card to just be like cast it. It's gonna resolve, and now I can be able to like help players and kind of help them interact. I mean, it kind of feels like I'm kind of guiding them in that direction. But
Mind
I'm just
control
like,
is
hey,
very
don't
powerful.
yeah, I'm just like, don't really like chase for it right now. Cause if you chase for it and he has it and you don't win, now we're just sitting here. So it kind of gave me that leverage against people in like at least 2 rounds that I had out of the 6. And it felt really comforting.
All right. Is there any of the cards I want to talk about? How have you found your mana base being able to play Warping Whale?
Pretty good, actually. I playing like Urza's Cave, the Gardens, and any of like the other weird lands that you have to pay a mana to produce the color. It's has proved really good. I was able to counter a deluge on one occasion, and I was like, thank you God, I cannot sit through this if this resolves. Um,
And Winter Moon.
exiling like Dranith Magistrate was pretty good too.
Yeah, yeah, that's not bad.
Winter Moon. Winter Moon.
Sorry, wrong stacks piece. Winter Moon. How did that do for you this weekend?
It drew a game. It forced a draw on a like a TNT player already having a Seaborn Muse.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this hurts the rest of the pod, but this is like the perfect situation to politic, somebody else to be, hey, if you answer this, uh, he already has like 40 cards in his hand. He's gonna untap with less resources. And he's like, if that happens, I'm just gonna agree to the draw now because we're not gonna sit through this game and just watch you just. And I'm like, it becomes sort of like a 3v1 when that was kind of being talked about. And I was like, I'll take the draw because I already had Clog Omens countered. And I was like, I have too many resources that I need to find to get there.
Yeah, that's pretty common with it operates a lot like Blood Moon in that respect. It just doesn't have the deck.
It doesn't. It doesn't stop them from untapping all their stuff every turn. It's only on their own turn.
Yeah, but that's
if I
why
remember
because
if I
it
remember
was
right.
heading into his turn, which
Gotcha.
we had already like 2 win attempts go on from 2 different players, and I felt like the resources were burnt, but they had like maybe 2 or 3 pieces of interaction left. And I was just trying to get into the direction of maybe we can get there. I mean, I could like I told them I was like, if it goes to this turn and you don't really get rid of it, and it goes to my turn somehow, I would win. Going with like 11 treasures, and they were like, "How would you do that?" I was like, "I'm gonna answer that question for you. Just know it might happen."
All right, real quick, I want to talk about your creature-based removal. Carnosaur and Fury. How have those been doing for you?
Fury did really great. You mean like being able to just not hard cast. I don't never hard casted it this entire tournament, or any things prior to that. It just being able to pitch a useless dwarf in my hand, burn like two creatures that are like generally like hurting me down, like hitting the Dranith Magistrate, hitting an op, anything like that has been great, especially for free because they're just kind of like holding it there for you, thinking that you can't answer it, and it does all the work I needed to do.
Do you find you're normally hitting? It's like pyro, so you can split it. So have you been finding that the second thing you hit matters very much?
Yeah, yeah. Like I mean, you have the opportunity to hit like Esper Sentinels or like any of the like Bloom Tenders, things like that. Those are pretty good. Even if you're just hitting like two things, like a Chimna and like another 2/2, it does all the works, especially with against the powerhouse decks like Kinnan or like TNT, just being able to abuse the power of playing more creatures than anything else
Sure.
to gain the advantage. Yeah.
All right.
And it opens up ways.
All right. Carnosaur.
I love it. You people always think that, a Grand Abolisher is going to be their safe bet. And it's not. I will blow you out. And that dinosaur does the work, just like Twin Shot.
Fair enough. I want to talk about a couple exclusions. My brother in Christ, you were not on a braid.
I'm not.
I'm not going to call it sacrilegious. I'm just going to be like, are you not afraid of Curse Totem?
I have Siege Smash.
That is one card.
That's sometimes all you need. Not every. I mean, one Curse Totem is one card.
Yeah, but the decks that run Curse Totem have black.
And tutor it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have one card. We have to go defense in depth. That's why, like, mono red is very much a quadrant, or like eighths theory of deck building.
I mean, I definitely see the option to play it. The reason why I didn't was just because I don't want to have to put myself in that defensive mentality all the time, especially being a prior Godo player.
Sure.
I always wanted to kind of like sit on waiting, and with the deck you can do a little bit more of that. Curse Totem does hurt, but eventually other players, it's not only your responsibility to open it up because they're like, oh, it's going to open up Magda, but like, yeah, but now I can't activate my Thrasios. Now I can't activate my Kin, and someone else is going to answer that eventually for you.
That's fair.
And it's a 1 out of 9. It's a 1 out of 99. It's just 1 out of 98 if you include Siege Mass and a Braid, and the dwarf that enters the battlefield and destroys an artifact. Sure.
All right. We're not gonna spend.
And then no Mutavault.
Oh yeah, that's right. What's up with that, buddy? You don't like our honorary dwarves in this house?
I did not find a single one. Just how I didn't have a real Fomari Vault. I was already crying.
Okay, fair enough.
So you just didn't have one.
I did not have one.
That's fair
Otherwise,
enough.
I would have probably played it, but I didn't have like the other, like the Destroy Land was pretty good for crimes.
Yeah, whatchamacallit's not bad. Volatile. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We like that card. It's just our land base is stupid tight right now. Depending on your build.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Moving on to the comparative analysis between y'all's. It's 33 cards, and I think we've been here talking about decks long enough, and I want to get into rounds. But I'm going to do a little brief overview. It looks to me like there is more. It's weird. There's some more traditional cards on branded side if you're looking at stacks. But if you said that, James, if you said that, yeah, I took three different archetypes and kind of just tossed them together and played that for a bit, I would have believed you because I'm seeing engineer but no I'm seeing curse mirror but no engineer. I'm seeing I'm seeing siege smash but no braid, stuff like that.
So it was justice without Pinnacle Monk or Chaos Warp.
Right. Well, Chaos Warp is the backup card as far as I'm concerned, but not having
Sure.
Pinnacle Monk because it's practically free. Especially when you're well, I guess it's less free when you're on Winter Moon. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, what I'll say is play Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Card is cracked in half. Needs to stop breach when you can just stop breach. Um, right? Like, here's the thing: Agatha's is another card that stops breach that does another thing, whereas your other thing is stopping. It is stopping Roxai, Chalice, but of course Brandon's running both, and you're running neither. But your perspective is it's not your job to stop things. You
Yeah.
are the danger.
I like to be the threat.
Yeah. But that said, if you if you're in that mindset, maybe maybe dropping Torpor is an interesting call. Um, because if you're just accepting that some things are just going to happen, like Brandon is, and it's not your job to police them. Torpor
Mhm.
might be one of those.
So
I mean,
I
like,
want to chat. Oh, sorry.
yeah, you're good. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I want to chime in about the Torpor because it's actually back in my list.
Okay.
But there's a reason why. It's that Esper commander that's coming out. The 2 mana
Asheton?
Orzhov that
Hashtag?
yeah, so I'm a little bit
Druid
more.
Lord.
I think it's the flavor of the week. I'm expecting to see a lot more Esper lists trying to just jam, Torpor or sorry, Thassa. So I did slot it back in. It's Torpor is almost always in the list. I just opted for it not this weekend.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think we've talked the various lists to death. Also, play Flare of Dupe, dude. It's so good. You will love being in that position sometimes.
Oh, it's a great card. I've always played Flare of Dupe as well up until this hard stacks version where I really tried to cut down on the number of interaction spells that weren't strictly something that could explicitly help me answer one of the problems I was worried about.
Right, right, because it's really just it's a backup card or sometimes a value
Yeah.
generation card, but usually a backup
Mhm.
card.
Yeah, yeah. I've copied an Adnos before. Feels great, but like I came in with a really like tight game plan that I was trying to execute, and it was like a nice to have, not a need to have.
Gotcha. All right, so a couple of questions I want to talk through if we haven't already gotten through them. Yeah, so I guess we talked about it a little bit. You were on a turbo stacks build, um, and you've moved them a little bit harder stacks. Do you feel like that panned out for you?
Yeah, for two different reasons. One, the mindset of going into a big tournament with an open meta to essentially, and there's people will say how they feel about the bans. I still think it's been great from a diversity standpoint. You're seeing decks that like I didn't know existed getting played, and some of them doing really really well. Like Glarb in both 10Ks that took place this weekend. I think they definitely made cuts. I don't know if both made the
Glarb
top
won.
table. Yeah. Oh
Glarb
yeah,
won
one.
one,
Oh okay.
and
Sorry,
you
it
had
won one.
and was in top table in yours. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think my approach going into these big tournaments because I don't typically play hard stacks at my local FNM, every Friday. But going into large tournaments, I had a specific game plan: disrupt my opponent's win attempts, lay low, let someone else become sort of the arch enemy, if you will, and then get there. And if I couldn't get there, then don't lose. That became the backup plan. And I didn't realize I hadn't lost a game until I was going into the finals. Like it really had never like processed, through my head. And of the three draws that I had, only one was like a real like probably a too early draw. And I actually made that comment and I go, I think we're having this conversation a little too early. And that's what prompted them to show the ad nauseas to one another. And but for the most part, like either I won the game or it was like a genuine draw like James and I had when we played our round. So that was my plan. It was a turn one, turn two stacks piece, lay low, do your thing, let everyone else become the threat, jam it when you see your window, and then if it's not there, then again, don't lose. And that's one of the rounds I'll explain that's round six. That's exactly what happened. I had a pyro and a rep blast, I had bottle cap blast. I knew I was blown out of the game from Bowmaster, and I went, All right. Well, I'm gonna sit here and let these three players kind of figure it out. And I know that a draw will get me into top four for the finals. So I'm gonna play smart, not greedy, and just try to find a way to win the game. So that's my thought about like why I picked hard stacks. Um, it allows you to play a little bit slower. It allows you to kind of um, really knock people off of what they're comfortable with, and that's my biggest concern about the list. Winning the not winning the tournament, but when I won the tournament and the list was going to get published, I'm just imagining like when I started playing Magda, you go click a list and you go, oh, that card is good. That's not the case. Magda is a toolbox deck at heart. You've got to think about what tools work best for you for the environment that you're playing in, and that requires like meta knowledge, win line knowledge, the pod composition that you're currently sitting at.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of facets that go into that, and I just as a player, as a Magda player, I really enjoy taking people off of what they're comfortable doing. Like that's just the best way I can describe it.
Sure.
And again, when we get through the rounds, we'll talk about what those interactions look like. But just don't make it easy for people. So that's why I ended up playing the list I'm on, and I would say it certainly panned out. I was shocked that that 5-0-3 for the longest time. I've started playing in August, so that's how long I've been on CDH in general. But I've only played Magda, and for the longest time, I could just not get my third win in a tournament. Like it just seemed like 3 was the number that I was just like cursed to not be able to break.
Right.
And when I finally got to there, and I was like, all right, I finally got past that hurdle. So for me, this tournament was great. I was over the moon. I love Magda. I just love the way the deck plays. I love the versatility, the flexibility, and the uniqueness that each pilot can kind of bring to their list.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you a question about that because I found when I used to play the harder stacks version or the turbo stacks version that mulligans were harder. Like not only harder, but they like you had to go deeper pretty much every time. Were you feeling like you were on a 4-5, or were you more in the 5-6-7?
That's a great question. I absolutely hate going to 5. I will never go below 5. I don't think I've ever gone to 4. You just can't win. When blue players start going down to 4, my mind like when we talk about the finals round, I'm like, all right, this player's actively looking for a Mystic Ristic. He's at 4 cards. So he's just trying to get back on his feet. I'm not worried about him interacting with me. So for us, we go to 4. It's like, what's your plan? Hope you draw lands and play the 2 dwarves you have in your hand.
Mana Vault, One Ring. We have to build it better.
Yeah. Seriously. So I will keep when we talk about the semifinals, it's like that was a bad keep for me objectively, and I got bailed out. Whereas like the final round, that hand was very purposeful. I kept that hand for a reason.
Right.
So yeah, I think you just have to be comfortable sometimes not playing with the most ideal hand, but asking yourself like, does this hand do something that will work within the composition of the pod? And 6 is usually where after three mulligans or 2 mulligans, 3 draws, I would like to think that I'm going to find something where I can just play on curve. By the time I go down to 6,
yep.
And there's a ton of value with this deck, and that's why I don't run Chrome Mox, Simeon, or Lotus Petal. It's like I just want to play spells on 1, 2, 3, and then go from there.
Okay, I like that. So, I kind of want to ask you both because we've already talked to Jace about his deck building on last month or so. But I do want to know if you expected a really bad matchup. Which one was it, and did it go that badly for you? Like, what decks were you like actively like? This is like where I'm working towards a draw, kind of a situation. I'll start with Jace.
I feel like I know Boz's answer, and he had mentioned it in our game that we played together during qualifying rounds. And Boz, I would say that it is a pretty rough matchup. Seen it in my round 5 as well. Yuriko, they just have a bunch of things that kind of like ram you through, and I mean like depleting your life total while being able to like use and abuse creatures that you just can't block. They play a bunch of hefty removal things.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
And like,
statistically, Yuriko is one of our worst matchups. The benefit there is that you just don't see it a lot. I don't know that the deck's actually good,
It's
but when we sit down in the pod, it's like, obviously I was weary of Magda across the table for me, but I'm like, I don't want to be the more threatening Magda. Like
yeah,
that's what I
yeah.
was thinking about.
And I
Yuriko
mean,
specifically, like depending on pod composition, especially with Magda in the pod, can just cannibalize us like no other deck.
Yeah,
Especially because it is on the highest amount of single target removal, arguably, than almost any other deck. I mean, Glarb is up there as well because it gets to run a lot of those 4-drop free interaction as well, like Snuff Out and stuff like that. But Yuriko runs all that stuff too. So it's
It-
like
yeah. As
it
Jason
gives
and
it
I
more.
found out, it also runs that card where you just take 15 life, and I just
oh, the
looked.
shadow.
Shadow.
I
Yeah.
remember looking. I remember looking over, and I'm like, I, I, I don't play against a lot of Yuriko. I know, again, I know the removal, I know the plan, but I'm like, I don't know how it wins necessarily. You know, you can assume Thassa Demonic, but it's Demir. But when he flipped that card over, I immediately looked. I'm like, how worried do we need to be? Like, are we gonna lose in 2 turns? Is this how do we deal with this? Is essentially like the conversation that I remember starting, and it was just a little like it kind of taking me aback a little bit because I'm like I don't know how to handle this right now. And we for like how that game played out, we were ended up able to deal with it, and Jason and I became the two that were really playing Magic that round. But yeah,
Okay, let
it's
me number one.
yeah. Yeah.
Magdas.
Yeah. So like Jason saying, Yuriko's certainly did you have any other decks, Jason, that you found that you were particularly concerned about?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think you'll maybe see it as much. Any variant I think with Jessica is just an alerting thing, especially being able to go like Tim to Jessica, then they can go Negate, kill off
Mhm.
3 dwarves. It is pretty big. And that was something I had to deal with in round 4. And I was just like, that's a huge setback for me.
Yeah, that's another great example of a deck that's really bad for us, but I just don't know that the deck's good.
T
So
T and J is probably okay.
It's okay. That's why I said you probably
yeah,
won't see as much as it.
yeah.
It did put in work on round 4, almost causing us to lose the game,
Hmm.
but I clutched it, so we're good.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So then I I have a disdain for ROG decks. I did not expect to see Rockside this tournament. Like I didn't expect to see a lot of it. Let me rephrase that. But I play against a ROG deck every Friday, some variant of it. And I've lost on turn 2, or I've lost before I've been able to get a turn 2 more times than I care to admit. So I'm always weary of the go fast turbo decks. So those are the games where I'm going to like, depending on the pod composition, there was a blue farm in my pod with the turbo deck. So I'm like, all right, I feel a little bit safer, but I'm still looking for the turn 1, turn 2 sphere effect, Thorn of Amethyst, because that will just blow them out. I don't know if Rock Size ever beat me where I had an early sphere on the
Right.
on the board. So I was
Pretty
aware of
universal.
turbo decks. Yeah, I was aware of turbo decks, not really afraid of them, just aware of them. The deck that I was genuinely afraid of was TNT, only because it has this incredible draw engine. It like Ristic, Mystic, Timna, but then it's got Oppo and Bowmaster, and then it can just do the Oops I Win with Brewmaster, and like there was just a lot going in with that color combination. I expected to see a lot of it, and I thought depending on how the pods were set up, it would be really difficult for me to deal with. So that's why I brought Uba's Mask. It was something that I was just like I need to be able to deal with these draw decks, like blue farm specifically, but blue farm TNT and so on. So I picked a handful of cards that I thought might be good silver bullets against what I would take as the most played and some of the better decks in the format.
I'll say it's the most played, but I won't say it's played by the best pilots.
You're absolutely right. I
TNT has
completely
been
agree.
TNT's numbers are kind of dog shit right now. And I don't think it's like because the deck is bad for sure. I think it's still in a new phase of discovery and mastery.
Yep. Yep.
And
So
but what I'll say is that I don't actually fear the TNT. TNT is one of those matchups where Like the new hotness is relying on the graveyard, and we have a couple or three ways to deal with that.
Mhm.
You can also kill Brewmaster in response to the ETB, so they just get a food and an exiled card and nothing to do with it. So I found a lot of if you're running like the cards that are incidental grave hate but also do something for your combo, like Agatha's or Hearse, I'm a little less afraid of Brewmaster specifically. And if you're running the amount of interaction, but I'm also playing a tempo version of the deck, so that's why I don't.
Yeah.
I have a removal for whatever the problematic creature is on the battlefield if I need to speed bump somebody for less mana than they spent on the card, so I'm going tempo positive there.
Yeah.
But I understand like a stacks variant where someone has an oops I win with creatures, in things that are hard for mono red to deal with, right? Like just okay, it's in the graveyard. What do I do?
That's actually why I played Soul Cauldron. I was not on Soul Cauldron. That's another example of a card where I was like, I need to be able to deal with like the Devoted Druid and some other things. Of
Gangbusters,
course,
dude.
of course, there's like the synergies with like 1/1 counters and Metallic Mimic and like all the other things, but it was mainly, it shuts down breed. Like when I'm looking at stacks effects, I want them to stop as many different win conditions as possible of the most important ones, but also have some like incidental value as well. And Soul Cauldrons was breach, it was graveyard shenanigans, and it was 1/1 counters for Bowmaster. So for me, it was like a card that I just needed to play. Not that I think you have to play, but it's certainly a really good card in our deck.
All right, I think we're going to get into rounds now. We'll try to make this a little bit quicker. We'll do our best. So because Brandon got me his information first, we're going to go Brandon James till unless including the rounds that you were both in the same round because you have different favorite cards, and I didn't want to redo all my slides. So I just duplicated a lot of my slides. So your first round, we have Shorokai, Magda, Sisse, Helga. So tell us about this round, buddy.
Yeah, so first game sitting down. I think I kept my first or second seven. I like some of the question. Like this is the as a technically still a new player. um, I like the area that I look to get the area I look to improve the most is how good can I sit down at a table, look at the four decks, understand the composition, think about how the decks are going to interact with each other and when they're going to interact, because that tells me when I think I will be able to have a window potentially. So one of the very first things that I thought about when I looked at these decks was, first off, what the hell is Helga? So I was like, let me read this card and figure out what it does. And then I kind of had an idea of what Shorkai did, but I wasn't exactly sure. I knew it was a value engine in the command zone. But Sisse was the real question. I had to ask myself, do I think that this Sisse player is on a planeswalker build or the creature build? And I wasn't entirely sure. I my gut was it's the planeswalker build. But when I saw Cage in my opening hand, I thought, you know, this could stop Sisse potentially. I know, I don't know Shorkai's win con, but I know Tameshi really does a lot of, like, I have a Tameshi player in my local play group. The graveyard shenanigans are definitely real. So I thought, I think this hits two of the decks, and I think the Helga deck I'm just not really super worried about. I think it was going to take a while for him to set up his value engine of what the deck does. So I thought Cage would be good, and then I had some other just cards in my hand, namely Sculpting Steel. So when we talk about how the game plays out, Sculpting Steel was my backup plan. Didn't end up casting it. I had to really think hard on like turn 3 if I wanted to, because Shorkai was out at that point. But I had a stacks piece. My game plan for most rounds is land a stacks piece turn 1, turn 2, and then kind of play your game. So Shorkai gets out, I think turn 2. It's like really explosive. So much so that I'm like, this guy's pulling away with the game. He's drawing cards every turn. And he goes to tutor for Curse Totem. This must have been like turn 3 or turn 4.
Pretty good in this deck.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. And guys, I will tell you right now, this is where you got to talk as a Magda player. You got to talk. He had played Fomori's Vault, and he had Shorekai, and he had already Shorekai'd 2 or 3 times. So we're a little bit later into the game. It again, I don't know exactly what turn it was, but
Sure.
he goes, he plays Merchant Scroll, I believe, to get Curse Totem. And I'm looking across Sisse, who has nothing going on, and Helga, which I don't know what the deck does, but didn't really have anything going on. And I look and I'm like, and I say to the table, I'm like, I understand why Curse Totem, why I want to get rid of Curse Totem. Like it doesn't, I can't win with it on the battlefield. But if this Curse Totem sticks, he's got Fomori's Vault. He's digging for X amount of cards every turn. He's sculpting his hand. He's activated Shorekai 3 or 4 times. I'm like, he's just gonna win the game. And at this point, I think I'd only had 1 or 2 treasures. I'm like, I'm not activating anytime soon. So if someone has an answer for this, like, I really am advocating that you like deal with it. And so we go back and forth. We yap for about 5 minutes, maybe. And eventually, the Helga player pulls out. I don't know the creature, but it was an evoke card, and it a single target evoke green creature, and he's able to blow it up. That is the real play of the game, was politicking to get my opponent to help me deal with Curse Totem. Had it stuck and it had went to my turn, I'm just playing Sculpting Steel, I'm copying Shorekai, and I'm just going to start stacking up treasures. But um, I don't think that I was going to be able to catch up to what Shorekai was doing. It just
Probably not.
too much value on the battlefield. So after I'm able to get my opponent to use his resources to deal with the Curse Totem, the stacks effects for me. I think we go around 2 or 3 more turns, and I'm just able to jam it, and it was just a win. And of course, the opponents right after the game go, "Oh yeah, getting rid of that Curse Totem was a bad idea." And I was like, "Yeah, I get it. I understand why it feels bad, but we would have just lost the game a different way." No one was going to catch up with their 2 value pieces. So that was really the only like defining moment of the game. It wasn't until after the round was over that the Shorekai player looks over to me and he goes, if you hadn't played that cage, I was going to win the game. I don't know if he said turn 2 or turn 3, but he's like, I had the win. And I didn't really it didn't process what it was. And I don't know the deck well enough. So he felt that he was going to be able to win on turn 2 or turn 3. So the Graph Digger's Cage absolutely was the thing that stopped me from losing, but also helped me eventually get the time to be able to win the game as well.
Gotcha. Well, I'm glad that worked out for you. I don't remember what Shorekai's win con with that little mana.
It's probably Polytyrant list. Like you find Hullbreaker Horror, any 0 drop.
Oh, because he already activated like twice, so he has
Yeah.
He had the mana Yeah, he had mana acceleration. He was able to get Shorekai out really early. I don't remember exactly what he. When you're round 1, you're not thinking like, oh, I'm doing tournament reports and whatnot.
Yeah,
Like, you're just happy you won the game.
Right. Okay. So let's bounce to your first round, buddy. So turn 1 Magda, seat 1 Magda, Kinnan, Glarb, TNT. How'd this go for you?
So it was in my opening hand. Opening up, keeping a first 7 with Ancient Tomb. I had like 2 crewing things, Glasses of Urza, and a Universal Automaton, and a red source. I was like, this is a keepable hand. I get to play 2 things turn 1, and it easily gives me access to 2 players' hands by turn 2. Essentially, turn 3 giving me players access. And I never really shared all the informational cards because I wanted players to kind of just know that the dangerous cards that were in their hand, but I didn't want to tell them interaction pieces in case they did try to chase for things. It led to a pretty good point in the game, and I was always like wondering what people were tutoring. Like I saw a demonic tutor, it found a culling ritual, and I was like, oh my god, now I have to deal with that the next following turn. But it really held down for me, because I was able to put activations. God's Fowl held down for a long period of time. Winter Moon held down these 3 players, and they just sat, all trying to figure out ways to get underneath me. And I eventually got double Ordawara'd. They Ordawara'd my God Sparrow, and the other player Ordawara'd the Winter Moon, just so the dude can Culling Ritual, clean the board. And that set me back a little bit. And that's when I lost my glasses. but I kind of felt safe because they didn't have any advantage engines.
Right.
There was no heuristic studies, nothing like that. After I portaled, I kind of hurt the Timna Thrasios player off their creatures, and he was just like, I have nothing to do for the rest of the game.
Yeah, just play control and try not to lose.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there was some crazy plays. It really was. The Timna Thrasios player actually tried to Grafdigger's Cage me, and Siege Smash kind of gave me a good opening because I had Portal Phyrexia into play. And I was like, I need this gone.
It's interesting that I guess that's kind of the ideal position you'd want glasses in, where you've played a card that doesn't do anything, and it just gives you the political tool, or like a window finder. But
oh yeah, like
you're not. No one's outpacing you in that situation. So I get in like a.
Sorry, it's tutorable off Saga. It's
right.
Like especially if you already assemble a crewer, you don't need to have to find Clown Car or like enough mana. It's just a free grab out of other 1-drops.
It can't grab Clown Card, just so you're aware.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
No, you can't grab Clown Card. You have to grab is there a 1-drop?
Yep.
Vehicle?
Universal Automaton, but no vehicles.
Yeah, no vehicles. I was like, there's
there's Consulate Dreadnought. I know. Maybe in casual Magda. Maybe in 7 Dwarves Magda. But yeah, it's really cool that the card worked for you. It might work in a slower list too. That might be part of it.
Yeah.
Because I look at it and was like, I'm on Pyro. I'm on Chrome Mox. It's another card that I can't pitch. It's interesting though. I wanted to try it when I first heard about it being lists. So let's pop over to Brandon's round 2. So we have Nagila, TNK, Magda, and then Essica. And our cards of the game are Sphere of Resistance and Mycosynth Garden, which I can guess why.
Yeah.
Did you build a bear? Did you build a portal or build a statue workshop?
So this hand was actually, if I remember, at mold. I think I went to 6 on this hand. So I'm looking at I know what Asika does, and Agila. So I'm like, all right, we got 2 turbo decks where Timna Crom also has just this. I think most builds have this opportunity where it can also just pop off, with Adnons and whatnot if the conditions are right. So I'm like, all right, I'm in danger here, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm not going to try to play fast. Like, all 3 of these decks are going to have, interaction for me. I need them to focus on themselves. So I'm mulliganing to try to find a stacks piece. And I think I got to 6, and my hand had Spear of Resistance and Blood Moon. And what was it? The Garden was in my hand as well, but I think that was pretty much it. I don't know that I played anything on 1. I might have had either a Bolt or I wouldn't have had a Reb or a Pyro. No, actually, I think I did. Because I chose not to use it since 2 players had draw engines already. So I play land pass and I go to my second turn and I play Sphere of Resistance. And I'm like, all right, well, this is gonna, like, again, there's already 1 Ristic study on seat 1. And seat 2 had I think an Esper Sentinel at this point. And that's when seat 4 was like, hey, can you like not play that right now? I need to like get back in it. And I'm like I understand, but I kind of need to play it right now. And I thought to myself, like, this is going to buy me a couple more turns where it slows them down enough. They still have to interact with each other. And they were like, this was a pod with, I would go ahead and say that all of these pilots were like skilled pilots from, my just take on how they were playing and interacting. So again, I'm just thinking, do my thing, stay back, let them look at each other and figure out how they're going to, interact. And what I was really hoping for was that was going to happen, and I was going to be able to stick the Blood Moon on 3, because I'm looking at 2 greedy 5-color list with no basic lands, and I'm looking at a blue farm deck as well that I doubt they play any basics as well. And there at this point there were no, I don't think there were any treasure or any like mana generators on the board. So I'm like, if this Blood Moon sticks, I might have an opportunity. And I had like Karn in my hand and some other stuff that I ended up showing, but like was never going to be able to play. So we go through the game. I try to stick Blood Moon on 3, gets countered, and I'm like, all right, well, that kind of sucks. And then I just proceed to like kind of just sit there. Oh, you know what it was? I got land screwed. I couldn't find a fourth land, so I never had the opportunity to play Karn even if I wanted to. So I really just was sitting there, and I'm just thinking I'm biding my time, and the player 4 looks over, and he's like, I guess there was some information that had been revealed, secretly, cards being passed around. And he goes, I think we're on maybe turn 5 at this point. And he goes, I'm off to the draw. And I looked at him and I'm like, I still feel like, in my mind, I'm still feeling like I think I can steal this game. Like I felt pretty comfortable that if I just waited until the dust settled, I would be able to get there. Because I know what it was. I had Magda, and I think I had, maybe it was Mutavault or something. But I had ways where I was like making a couple treasures. It was Magda and Mutavault. So I'm making treasures, but I don't have like the I win, because I got to 4 treasures at one point.
Right.
So, and then that's when he was like, all right, like, do you want to do the draw? And I'm like, well, like, I'm thinking to myself, if I get one more turn, I can win this game. But that's when, the Blue Farm and the AGL players both show Adnos, and Asika's got one answer. And I said to him, and I'm like, I can copy Sphere, and neither one of these Adnos players are going to win. So at that point, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, they know that I'm going to have the ability to activate next turn. Resources are going to get pointed towards me. I'm probably going to get hated out, and I'm probably not going to win the game. So, like, really reluctantly, I kind of accepted the draw. And the reason I say that I reluctantly accepted it was in the boil, I drew 4 times, and I drew my winning in as well. So I was really conscious of like not drawing games if I didn't need to.
Right.
I'm drawing a game if I'm going to lose, not if like I still think I can win the game. So very reluctantly, I say, okay, we draw, and then we continue to play out the game just for playing sake. But yeah, I was not thrilled about it. Wasn't happy. But again, 2 turbo decks and a blue farm, like my odds in seat 3 were already not good to begin with.
Right. No, absolutely.
So
that's
took
your
it
game to
concession.
lose, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
No, I would have taken that draw. As well.
Yeah, I thought I could, dude. I'm
Same.
telling you, I was sitting there when he asked me. I'm like, I think we're asking this question a turn too early, because I'm thinking to myself, I can win next turn. Like I've got a real opportunity if I was able to get Karn to stick with a 4th land, and then like potentially get Lattice or whatnot. But it just wasn't going to work.
So that's one draw. Let's go to the next one. Quite a few.
Oh.
All right. Let's try to move through these a tiny bit faster, I think. So we have Derevi, TNT, Jace on Magda, and then Kinnan. And the card of the game is Winter Moon. Not Orc, apparently. Moon.
Winter Moon. Yeah, no, I
Get it right.
I had a really strong start off into this game. Opening up Magda, the 3/3 mascot, and I think in turn 3, when I was like, oh my god, I think I can get there, and they probably won't have the interaction. I draw the Clock of Omens, and I was like, this is probably one card I don't want to put on a stack, And it's those kind of things where you have to think, it's like, do I just create 5 treasures and take the miss that I can win this game right now, and no one has interaction? And the moment I put it on the stack, it got countered, and I was like, you know what? This game was fun, guys, but I'm not the threat anymore. And so, they continued to build board states. TNT on their turn before my final one played Seedborn Muse. So they just started accumulating all that Karn advantage for them. Kinnan activated at least twice on his turn with the first one, and the second one revealed Void Winter.
Yikes.
And I was like, that's pretty good going into these next two following turns, especially with the guy with the Seedborn Muse. Derevi tried to pop off using like this Displacer Eldrazi, couldn't get there because they were just all answering each other. There was this really good, interesting green card. The moment it tapped itself on second main, it put a permanent into play, so it got around the Void
Kona?
Winner. Very interesting card.
Kona?
And when Derevi couldn't win on their last turn heading to TNTs, that's when I kind of politicked for if Kinnan or the Derevi player could essentially just remove that Seedborn Muse right there on the spot for me to kind of give them less access to more of their mana on lands, because they had maybe about like 9 lands after all the activations, and we weren't very many into turns from there. So they were definitely ahead with maybe about a grip of like 20 to 40 cards. And I was just like, if you do this, there's a potential that he'll take the draw. You know, Kinnan offered a draw. He was like, I'll put it on the stack 30 seconds. I won't offer another one. The moment TNT saw the Winter Moon, he's like, yeah, man, I won't win through that. I'll take the draw. And that's how the game just ended right there. And I was happy with that because I wasn't going to assemble the win anytime soon. And I was definitely at the most disadvantaged.
Wait, so I want to know what the card was that was put that did the show and tell.
Everything okay?
I
Can you
feel
hear me?
like I lost him.
You're not here?
Uh,
Yeah, might just need to reset his mic.
I might. Need
Yeah, I
to
kind of
reset
feel
my
like
mic.
he froze out.
yeah, his quality on his video is kind of shit in the
Glitching.
All
bed.
right, give me 1 second.
Well, looks like he's gonna have to do some video editing.
Heck
Yeah,
yeah,
he can cut this out. It'll be easy.
is.
He's doing it in OBM. It's literally just like a cut and drag.
For sure, for sure. Honestly, I feel like this was the safest game that I could have drew the entire event.
Yeah. Here's the thing, and like, you know, we're off the record now for the video. I felt like people were way too draw heavy. Like I felt like as I'm just walking around, like people are just asking for draws for the sake of it. And I'm like, I know I talk about in my game plan of like force a draw if I know I'm not going to win,
Oh,
but
he's
like,
back.
Hey
yeah.
guys, I'm here.
Welcome back.
Hey.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
no, I heard. You know, my down was fine. My up was terrible. You guys just couldn't hear me. I could hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
So my recording is gonna be fine. I'm not gonna have to do any editing. So,
Sure.
so what was I saying? Yeah, no, that definitely sounded like a safe draw, right? It sounded like one that you were better off not trying to push.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Did we have anything else we wanted to say about that one before we move on to round 3?
No, this was an interesting round coming up, though.
It is, though. I think.
Yeah.
So I'll say that it's this is about Brandon's round 3, but it is also Jace's round 3.
Absolutely.
So we have Yuriko, then Brandon on Magda, then Krakashima, and then James on Magda. So I'm gonna let you guys just take turns telling the story, I guess.
Go ahead, boss.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we kind of had a conversation of like, I think it was one of the first things I said was like, this, like Yuriko, especially going first, this is not good for us. Like, I don't know, I don't remember exactly how I said it to Jace, but I definitely said like, this is not good. So yeah, so I don't I mean, if you can remember how the game kind of starts out, please feel free to tell
Oh,
the story.
very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, Yurika opened up Fairy Seer, being able to scry too. I definitely feel like that shadow stayed on top for a purpose. That was going to hit us for that 15 damage on turn 2, you know? And that's kind of how they started off their really strong turn, depleting off of a life total. Um, I
I
know
think
going into Krark and Thrasios' turn that they didn't really do anything besides like maybe a Soul Ring and then pass,
mhm.
but there was a game rule violation coming from that player. due to the
Mm.
fact that they ended the turn and they still had a grip of 7 after casting a Soul Ring when they should have had a grip of 6.
Oh dear.
Yeah, he
Yes.
actually had Jace. He had 8.
Oh, see, that is
Yeah.
what was bizarre because that actually gave it wasn't. I thought it was actually going to be a simple fix to where it was it's just shuffle your hand at random. It'll pull a card from it. It'll get shuffled back into the deck. The player will get a warning. And the ruling that actually came out to that was uh, Brandon being like I think what the last player in that like order before him gets to look at his hand and put one back into the deck. And I was like, that's so now Brandon has information from Clark Thrasios
Yeah, and I
that the
did
rest of
follow
us
like
don't have.
Is
yeah,
it
and I
Krark
did
Thrasios or is it Krark Sakashima?
That was
Clark
Clark
second.
Thrasios.
Oh,
Because remember, he put the dose on the falling leaf in the graveyard.
Oh yeah, then hey, I made that mistake. I apologize.
it's all
You're
good.
right.
It's
You're right.
very easy to fix.
Yeah. So you're right. So basically, the ruling, like in constructed, it kind of makes sense. You get thought seized essentially, but
More player.
yeah, it was a little weird because like I remember when the judge made the ruling, the player puts his hand down and like sets it on the table, and like I remember asking, I was like, I look at it. I was like, I want to make sure I'm not like I don't like pick it up, and then I all of a sudden am getting a game rules violation. They're like, yeah, look at it, look through it, and like I looked at the guy and like he admitted it, so it wasn't like he got caught, at least purposefully. Um,
How does that happen on like
so
turn 1 though?
he must have just drew an extra card or something when
He
he
probably
started the
drew
game.
8 in the start and then
Yeah,
drew into 9.
yeah. So I did tell him I'm like looking at the hand. He had the gas. He had breach and brain freeze, and like docin and some other stuff. And I'm sitting here wondering, and I'm like, oh, what do I get rid of? Like he had already put the soul ring down. You're right, because there was one land in his hand, and I thought maybe I'd take him off the land, but no. So I put breach back, and I did agree. Like him and I politics, and I'm like, hey, like I obviously he knew what I got rid of, and I said, all right, I'm not going to reveal that information to the table, and I tried to keep my word to that, which I did. And it was like afterwards we ended up talking. He's like, yeah, the breach was the right card to take. So
Yeah.
yeah, we were going to be in trouble pretty quickly. Had that not happened, but then again, he saw an extra card, so that could have been any one of the ones in his hand.
Yeah, from you, Mr. I'm going to open up Ancient Tomb into Mirror of the Forebears into Diamond Pitching Vista into the 01 Dwarf. Get out of here.
That's what it was. I for some reason I had a block on how that game started out, and it was Mirror of the Forebears, and there was an artifact. Was it an artifact dwarf or just a regular dwarf?
No, you played the
Armorer.
01 Dwarf, the Armorer.
Oh,
The
okay. Oh
goaded
yeah, that's right.
dwarf.
That's right. That's right. Okay. So yeah, so I got the early artifact dwarf down. I got to enough treasures, and like where the game was at, for some reason, the Cork deck either he was just tapped out or something, and then Yuriko wasn't really doing anything. Like once I got over the initial like shock and awe of like I just got hit for 15, am I gonna die like in 2 turns? Um, then I all of a sudden I was like, all right, I'm not as worried. Like he's doing this loop, but I don't think he's gonna win the game. Um, so then it's basically just me and Magda, and like Jay said, he kept mana open. I'm like, all right, so he's got interaction. It is what it is. Like I will activate, and if he's gonna like kill Magda or something, I'm gonna get like impactful spells. Um, so I go ahead and pull the trigger before it gets to his turn. Um, and I know that he has the mana up. I know the vault was untapped, but I didn't think the vault was gonna get used for a spell.
I,
um,
it was actually a little bit more different for our end. It was on Yuriko's turn before a
okay.
damage trigger happened, is when you started the activation because you didn't want to take another 15.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say I couldn't this game, all I remembered was getting my shit copied. And
Oh,
like
yeah.
yeah.
Well, that is pretty memorable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty big though. I mean, like he puts the activation on a stack. I attempt to return the favor, copying the activation, and in response, he kind of thinks about it for about like a minute or two. Then he goes delayed blast fireball, which after I already crewed my Magda and my other dwarf, it hit all 3 of my things, and I was like, well, that kind of sucks. And
Yeah,
with
I
my
that's oh sorry.
yeah, no, you're good. And with my activation being first on the stack, I was like, it would suck to see him go portal right after I find portal. But my choice was always going to find portal first after the setback.
Yeah, so I had some decisions to think about, and this could be a great opportunity where you guys can chime in on what your thoughts would be here.
Yeah.
After the game, Jace, there was a moment where I thought to myself, I should have got Gadrick. Like, I didn't even contemplate that because at that point we had removed 8 creatures from the board. So like grabbing the dragon might have been right, knowing that I had sculpting steel in my hand. So I didn't grab portal because I was going to copy yours, which I ended up doing. But rather than grab Gadrick, I thought I've set him back. I got rid of his vehicle and I've taken him off of his creatures. I know that he's going to get portal before I ever get to it. But if I play God's Pharaoh statue here, this locks those two out, and then I'm asking myself, do I think I can beat this Magda player? And I felt really confident that I could do it until, you know what? It was actually going to be 9 treasures. The cart player had a Eldrazi kitten on the battlefield.
Displacer Kitten.
Yeah, or Displacer Kitten. Sorry.
I just want to clarify with you. I'm pretty sure Gadrick triggers at your end of turn, not at
You're
everybody
right.
else.
Yeah.
You're right. And
So Gadrick would not have worked.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay, so then never mind. So it was. I still think grabbing the God's Pharaoh was the right thing
stage
to
was
do.
Yeah.
That thing was big.
I just couldn't remember when it happened afterwards when I was trying to like think about the game. I just remember the copy. I remember like, all right, yours is gonna go on the stack. You grab portal. I'm like, okay. Like again, I knew I had sculpting steel in hand, and I'm like, I think the God's Pharaoh statue is good enough. But when you were able to get the displacer kitten, it really created a problem. If you weren't able to do the kitten portal thing every single time, I think me having God's Pharaoh statue and a copy of Portal, like I'm gonna win that game. Like
Yeah,
I think yeah.
Keep going.
No,
That
you're right.
was like
That's
a sweet
it.
spot. That the being able to flicker portal 4 times that game sets you back, especially because you clown card for 6
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
and got 4 or 5 dudes, and I was like, that's kind of silly.
I did it on purpose so that I knew that like I thought you would only be able to like at most if you drew the non-creature spell to be able to do the flicker once. So I did do a clown car for 6 or 7. I can't remember exactly. And I thought this is pretty bad if I'm doing it, but if I get at least 3 clowns, I'm looking pretty good. I got 4. So I'm like, all right, I'm safe from 1 portal flicker, but that ended up not being enough.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
So you had sculpting in hand. Did you have clown in hand at that point?
No, I drew clown.
Okay, cool. Because I was like, man, if you have a decent amount of mana and then mass it, and then you choose to get Maskwood instead, that's there's a lot of like really interesting board states where Maskwood can be a good call.
Yeah.
But at the point at which 2 players are close to out of the game, less so.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, Yuriko didn't play for the rest of the game. They have 3 lands.
Exactly how I like
Arceus didn't
Yuriko to play.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my god, we're dogging on these people.
Yeah, I was top deck. Well, they were catching incidental strays from you flickering portal every turn, right? Like I'm like the only reason I was able to like stay somewhat in it was I wasn't under the God's Pharaoh stacks. So I'm like, all right, I can still play my things and like try to get like enough of a window to like get there. But I was in top deck mode when I drew Clown Car. I think I only had it. That might have been my only card in hand, or maybe I had one other one. But I looked at it.
Your last turn.
Okay, yeah, because I looked at it and I'm like, I think I'm gonna play this for like 6, and I remember saying it out loud. I'm like, anytime you're playing Clownfar really for more than 0, you're probably hurting, unless there's like a really specific reason you're doing it. So yeah, I think we went back and forth. Jace, did we get to time that round, or did we just kind of like agree that we weren't gonna win?
After he Correct Horacio tried accidentally putting a dose on the hidden leaf into the yard, and I kind of told him, I was like, hey homie,
oh yeah,
that's not really a good thing to shove. And he's like, well, I was like, well, I'm not gonna target it because I don't want that nasty thing in my side of the field.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a chance that Brandon will take it, especially after he has a Magda. And so I was like, I don't really need to take it. So I go to my upkeep, or on his end step, I sudden shock Brandon's Magda. And I was like, that won't allow him to make 4 treasures on this upcoming turn, have more mana. And I think going up into my upkeep to my draw is when the Clark Thrasios and Brandon and the other guy were just like, Yeah, man. I think this is a good situation for where we take a draw. And
Yeah,
I mean, I couldn't cast Magda. It costed 4, and I just didn't have enough resources. And all I was doing was just hurting Brandon for a long period of time.
yeah, because there wasn't enough in the yard, and then like we were just grabbing like 1/1 dwarfs with Portal at that point. The interesting note with the Dosen player, he did not make that connection to Portal being on the battlefield. He puts it in the graveyard, and then like goes to pass or something, and like Jay says something, and he goes like, "Oh, haha, I was kidding. I didn't mean to. I wasn't actually putting that there." And I'm like, if you don't say anything, he absolutely leaves that there. But I don't know that that card's that good for us. Like we were both looking for ways to get treasures to get Magda activations.
So
Um,
it's not good for me in particular because it wasn't that part where I needed it in the situation.
mhm,
But it's definitely a thing for you assembling because I mean, you did have Mirror of the Forebears at one point, and you did sacrifice it accidentally. I wasn't
mhm,
going to tell you
yeah.
to my portal trigger when it wasn't a creature. So I was like, it's kind of the advantage. He thinks it's a creature. I'll let it go. And I think if
That's a
you
game state
did,
violation.
I'm not going to admit that. Anyways, I had realized after the whole interaction, I wasn't going to tell him to put it back.
Yeah, this is where I just like some of the things are just a little foggy about the interaction in the game. What's important was the return of the favor. I remember the sudden shock really blowing me out because I had the ability to tap for 2 treasures, and then I would have been able to get to 5. Um, so yeah, when that happened, I went, "Oh well, fuck, that sucks." Like that's was not great. So yeah, so I don't like we didn't run out of time, but I think we were like really short with the amount of time,
Yeah.
and we just kind of like, yeah, I think this is a draw. Like we went back and forth for at least a few turns of doing the we both have portal. You're under a stacks effect. Your Magda's died two or three times. I can't remember.
Mhm.
Like we are not going to win the game, and we know that our opponents aren't going to. So that was like a true like this is a draw. Like no one's winning the game.
So it definitely it's interesting to see the mirror matchup in a way that's not like a meme, right? Um,
Yeah.
we on the server we play the when we were at when we were before the rumble we played a couple of 4-way Magda scrimmages, and it was the kind of cock and ball torture you'd expect. Um,
Yeah.
but it's really cool that like this sounds like a really interesting game with 2 Magdas in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
Not
it again. It,
no one pithing needle naming Magda. I've seen that or I've heard of it.
oh, oh, you
Yeah.
know what? Jace did have a displacer or a disruptor's flute named LED, which was
Ah,
a good call. But I did think, like, I'm like, man, when you played it, that's what it was. I remember us talking. I don't know if it was in the moment or afterwards, where I'm like, if you're like, he's on Realm Scorcher Hellkite. So this is a Jace. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I said it. You're on Dragon. I know these guys don't like it, but I have played Dragon in the past in big tournaments because it is a little bit easier when you got all this other stuff going on. Um, but if you are convinced that my win con is twin shot loops, and you play that Disruptor's Flute and you just name a Bark Form Harvester, I might be hurting. Like I don't know that. Like I've got to start to like really think about how can I win the game if that's my main win line. So again, like you named LED, which is fine. But we did talk about like what were some other targets in a mirror match setting to potentially like not name Magda because that's going to hurt both of us. But what's something that I could name that would hurt my opponent and not me?
So the problem with that is that when you go for a win, you would have to pick what you're going to name based on like what's already engraved. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you have access to the One Ring, you can just go get Clock of Omens, draw a removal spell for the
True.
thing, and then just get rid of it. So like
Yep. Yeah. Good
it's
point.
inconsequential.
Yep.
Yep.
Good point.
All right.
Round
So
4.
round 4, yeah. So this one is Brandon's. We have Kazar, Ukama, Magda, Kinnan, and Malcolm Vile.
Yeah. This will be the fastest tournament report round that you guys will ever have.
Good.
I keep a hand that has Sphere Resistance and Magus of the Moon in it. I did not have Soul Ring. I draw Soul Ring. I play Soul Ring on turn 1. My opponents are kind of screwed. I play Magus on turn 2, and essentially no one else plays Magic.
Yep.
Seat 1 had Elves of the Deep Shadow. That was it. But the other people, like they had kept some greedier hands where they were counting on some of their artifacts to kind of get them there. So we go around a bunch of turns. I only have Automaton and Magda. I play it out a lot longer than I should, but just to be really safe because Seat 1 does have access to black. So I'm like, all right, well, I feel comfortable. We get to a point where Seat 3, Vial Smasher, Wheel of Fortunes, I should have activated in response to that. I didn't. That was a mistake. It goes to Seat 4 or Seat 1, and he has Toxic Deluge. And that's when I think Seat 1 was just a newer player, if I remember correctly, or hadn't been playing for a long time. And the Vial Smasher player is telling him, do the Deluge. And my response to him trying to Deluge was, do you have an answer for Kinnan? Because Kinnan at that point, like he had played Lotus Petal for 2. There was a Sphere and a Thorn out at this point in the game. Like the game was locked up. So he plays Deluge. I say, do you have an answer for Kinnan? Because he's got 7 lands. He's got 4 tapped artifacts. If Magus is gone, he just plays Kinnan next turn, and he does not care about these effects. They both say we don't have anything, and I'm like, all right, well then, like, I'm gonna just jam it. He had actually tried to play Abrupt Decay first, and then they ended up changing and going to Deluge. So when he does that, I'm sorry, all right, I'm gonna activate. I put the clock down. He tries to Abrupt Decay. At that point, I have treasures to win over the top, and then the game's over. But it was a great example of like somebody giving really bad advice to someone on how to interact with different stacks pieces. Where obviously I won the game, and he didn't want me to continue to have this like oppressive board state.
Yep.
But you just give it to the next person, like the very next turn. So we had a long conversation after that. He felt really salty about me jamming the win attempt, but I had the win 12 ways to Sunday at any point that I wanted. I just shouldn't have. I should have just jammed it before the Wheel of Fortune. That was my reflection from that game.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Give them 0 outs.
Yep.
All right, so let's go to James's. So I have a. Oh no, yeah, this is a tough round.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah, Magda, Timna, Jessica, Malcolm Vile, and Tim Dargo.
Hmm. This was definitely a round that I felt super safe to win, but a minor error, not really an error in my thinking, but in a way that he didn't have something, was just Timna Jessica assembles like Jessica turn 3, turn 4 to where it can just neg my things down. I attempt to bottle cap fire blast, targeting their 1/1 creature that they had, and I was thinking I'd be pretty safe. I have a Flare of Dupe where I can just sack my other dwarf that's not Magda to either stop Malcolm Vile from countering it and just being able to go on the top from there, or being able to just hold priority, maybe try to get 2 different hits and make at least 7 or 8 treasures to put 2 activations. And he was just like, I'm calling the week. And I was like, oh my God. So now I'm not getting an activation, and now my board's getting wiped. And so that kind of really put me behind from just that Timna Jessica player. Malcolm Vile was assembling a board state. They had essentially just casted Malcolm on their last turn that they did play. Timna Dargo was out in the waterworks, just passing turn. I think they had like a Bergie and then pass a turn on their last one. I was debating on casting Winter Moon or Torpor Orb, and on my last turn, I just casted Torpor Orb. I was like, well, Thassa Console, it's going to be a thing if it goes to like Malcolm Vile. And so I passed on that. Timna Jessica's last turn, they had put an Abolisher on the stack. And I was like, do any of y'all have anything for this? And they were like, no. And I was like, I can propose an ID here. And so I did. And they were like, what's going to be the answer to the Abolisher? I was like, well, my Urza's Cave finds me Talon Gates to hit the Abolisher.
Yep.
And so at any moment in time where I feel like it's going to be an opening moment where we can interact is where we chase it. And, he was like, well, I'm not going to take it. So, he kept it resolved. He casted like 2 or 3 spells that didn't matter. Then he goes, his last one is like a Diabolic Intent. And I was like, okay, now I put an activation on Cave. and he goes Adnaz on top. Finds like the only two important cards. He goes all the way down to 7. He finds Touch of Spirit Realm and Final Fortune. He Final Fortunes underneath the Abolisher still, and then he touches it. So now he has a protected next return again. And I'm like, oh my god, we can't deal with this. I have like 3 cards in my hand, no colored mana sources available left. And I'm looking like, guys, do you have anything still? And I'm like, man, do you have like an Orcish Bowmaster to the Timna Dargo? And he's like, yeah, I do. I was like, bro, I saw your Tainted Pack. Could you just Tainted Pack for the OBM? He's like, yeah, I can. He finds, he goes past a little bit down, sees lightning balls. Like, you should have just stopped at lightning bolt. I have Ghostfire Slice. I could have killed this man. I showed it to you a while ago. Hits all the way to like his last 7 cards, sees LBM, plays it, puts him to 6. He goes, attempts to swords it, and I'm like, I'll cast Ghostfire Slice, triggering Malcolm's 2 fish and study to draw 2. The next 2 triggers will ping at your face, and then you'll die on the 4. And so that caused us to draw the game because she was like, well, after you guys did all that work, I don't want to like cuck you out of that one. So that's how we ended up on the draw.
I mean, didn't want to cuck you. Did they have it still?
Yeah, they definitely had it on their turn, but because she couldn't do anything without any of the other 2 of us doing something to stop him from winning, she took the draw.
Y'all should have.
She was willing to draw.
Okay, well then you guys had already agreed to a draw.
Yeah, we had agreed to a draw after killing the Timna Jessica player. Because the Malcolm Vile had like 40 cards after both Ristic and Fish. You know, and she was just like, well, I think it's only fair that I give it a draw here.
Well, I mean,
she didn't have to.
So what I'll say is that you guys shouldn't dig if the other player hasn't explicitly said if you dig and go for tainted on a stop one person from winning. That has to be a suicide pact. Otherwise it doesn't make any sense. So I would say in the future, don't coach the person with the opportunity to save you guys from losing to sandbag or to make that an extortion moment, right? It has to be.
Maybe I misspoke a little bit. We all had agreed, but the guy who was winning did not agree to the draw. So she was more than willing to take the draw after all of that stuff still happening on, even after she drew 40 cards.
Right. That's what what I'm trying to say is that was just out of decency, because according to the way you're telling the story, they were in a position to win from that point and had just been okay with taking the draw. The conversation should have been, well, you and player B, the one that was tainted pacting for the OBM, your conversation should have been like, you can stop this, but we cannot go for it if this person does not go for it or does not say yes. If you stop them, this is a draw. Like, you got to have that in writing.
Yeah, I mean, you sometimes, maybe I'm a little bit more trusting of a person, but I will kind of take that decency. There was no loss for us, any of the people in there, for taking the draw, with the amount of points we had still being in top tables.
That's true.
Definitely didn't see her expect for her to still keep the end of the bargain, but she did, and
which is why
Lily's a good player.
Which is why I'm telling you that you should never do that again, because you got lucky. You ran into a person that sacrificed Eevee to because they thought you guys acted valiantly. So that's
heroes.
Exactly. To be fair, that's the kind of thing I would probably do too, because I thought it was more fun. It was more fun watching it happen. But I don't think you should ever count on that. Ever. All right. Round 5. Brandon, this is Sisse, Kinnan, you, then Malcolm Kedis. And
yeah, this. Oh, sorry.
Go for it, buddy.
Oh no, I was gonna say this is actually a really. This will be another really quick one because it was a turn 3. Yeah, turn 3, I think. I'll do the math. So the important lines, Sisse does its thing. It gets out. It plays spells, but Kinnan plays a fish. And I remember in my hand, I've got for certain. I remember Soul Ring, Soul Cauldron, and Universal Automaton. And so people are like, the question comes up: Are we going to feed it? Are we going to be responsible, et cetera, et cetera? And I'm like, all right, well, like, I had a plan to play these cards, which would give him X amount of draws. I'm going to play this instead, but I know what happens when Magda plays an artifact dwarf. I don't have anything else. Like that was like my politicking. So they go, okay, all right, well, like so, player 4 goes, he doesn't feed it. It goes to Sisse. I think Sisse feeds it 1 or 2 times. But the Kenyan player was kind of screwed on lands. He didn't end up having a blue and a green source when it gets to his turn 2. He had a workshop. That's what it was. So I see why you hate the workshop. But Sisse on its turn 2 just like plays a ton of stuff. Just like it's starting to get like pretty threatening. It gets Sisse out. And so it goes to Kinnan. Kinnan's turn 2. The fish goes away. He plays another land. Plays the workshop. Does something else. Like I can't remember exactly what he plays, but it wasn't relevant. He gets Kinnan out. He had an artifact that got him the color to get Kinnan, but he's on workshop and a maybe a City of Brass, the one that taps for both or for anything. So he does have a Kinnan, which is going to be important. Or it might have been his turn 3, but that's irrelevant. It gets to my turn. I play Magda. I attack with the top. I attack the seat 4. I get 1 treasure. Pass. Sisse's turn 3 is so good that like everyone basically assumes that we're just going to lose. Like it's pretty rough. He gets what is it? It's the Scryte, the card that gives the stuff.
Spellskite.
The legendary spell. No, not Spellskite. The Phyrexian 1 mana. Skrelv. That's what it is. He's got Skrelv. He just had a lot of stuff. Like I knew that when it got back to his turn, we weren't going to get another one because he had enough legendaries on the board. Blighted Halfling, so it goes to Kinnan. Kinnan doesn't do anything. He's dirtling, and then it gets to me. And I only have 3 treasures. And I remember like looking at and this is where I'm trying to like extract information from seat 4 because I know that Kinnan's off. Sisse like blew their load, like basically dumping everything on the table. And I show the seat 4. I'm like, I've got this, and I show him Plundering Barbarian. And I'm like, this is all I really have to like deal with Sisse. I'm like, do you have anything? And he looks at me. He's like, I really don't. He's tapped out, and I go, perfect. So I go to combat, and I'm like, I look to the Kinnan player, and I'm like, you're gonna let me get through, right? Like I say it like kind of like sarcastically, and he's like, no, I'm not gonna block you. And I go, all right. Like so I go, all right, I'm gonna go to combat. Declare attackers. Blocks, no blocks, fine. Play Great Train Heist for the first and second mode. The first mode being like it's going to untap, give me additional combat. Second mode being when I make the combat, when I do combat damage, I create the treasures, which gets me to 5. I untap, I go to combat again, and then the question is like, well, I can block it this time, and I'm like, that's not an issue. Go grab clock, put the clock down, tap, untap, the game's over. And like everyone's just looking like, what the hell just happened? How did you win that game? The important to note was like, don't get extremely eager. Like I needed to connect. I needed to connect with both of those creatures first without a blocker being declared, because otherwise I wasn't going to be able to get there. Like I think Kedis or Malcolm was on the bat. I think it was Kedis. Yeah. One of the creatures was on the battlefield. That opponent was tapped out. I was really trying to extract information around interaction from him. Kinnan could block it, but I'm like, he's already so far behind that I know he's not going to block with me only being able to get to 3 treasures. But you can't just assume that. So that's why I was like, oh yeah, like I kind of like, I'm joking it up, like just kind of rizzing a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, you're not going to block. Like I need to know that because otherwise I'm done. The game's over. So that's what ended up happening. And, again, should have lost the game primarily due to seat order, but it gave me the win.
So you had to use your treasures in that moment because you were on workshop, right?
So I had Soul. I don't think I had workshop out that game. I had Soul Ring. And probably an ancient tomb or.
Did you say that Kinnan was on workshop?
Kinnan was on workshop.
What? Okay, never mind.
Yeah, Kinnan was on workshop. I remember him not having access to both colors. But he played something that, like, I think an artifact that got it to him. I can't remember if it was a pedal or whatever it was, but maybe a signet. I don't remember. He was able to play Kinnan, had not attacked or done anything else. But yeah, I remember I had exactly 3 treasures and I had exactly the mana. I think it was 5. I think I had exactly 5 on turn 3. So Soul Ring plus 3 mana, something like that. So I was able to get there just by doing that.
Congratulations. It's kind of like the ideal usage for that card is literally stealing a win.
Yeah.
You know, a 4 mana. It's kind of that. Yeah, it's kind of like that. The way in which we use Return of the Favor, because it's helping you get to that 5.
Yeah, and again, like I was telling a couple other people, that game could have played out a lot differently. And I'm glad, like, when I kept the hand when I saw Train Heist and Automaton, I just had to keep enough heat off me from like Automaton's just not going to survive. So with it just being Automaton and Magda, I'm like, look, I can only get to 3 this turn. I'm like, we're not getting another turn anyways. Like, I'm not going to be able to get there. And that's why I'm like, all right, what do we have for Sisse? I'm just talking at this point. And ultimately, like, I felt pretty safe that seat 4's guard was down. Seat 1 had already played everything, and Kennen was kind of just there. I just needed Kennen to not block, and he didn't. And that was like, he was surprised when it happened when I played it, and he's like, "Do we just lose?" I'm like, he's like, "But I can block now." And I'm like, "It's too late. Like, it doesn't matter at this point."
Yeah, because did you have a tapper?
I didn't have a tapper, but what happens is he didn't declare a blocker on the first combat, so the second mode goes off, gets me to 5 treasures. Untap, I go to an additional combat, attack Magda and Automaton. That's 7 treasures. Activate before he declares a blocker.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Math makes sense there.
Why did you need to go to 7 there?
I didn't need to go to 7, but I was like, let me go to 7 just in case I need to get the 2 extra treasures to tap on top of some other kind of crazy interaction. I didn't need to, but I did just to be safe.
Well, you would have needed to get to 8 if you wanted that sort of interaction, right?
I had Soul Cauldron out.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly the lines, but Soul Cauldron did get played at some point. I think it must have been turn 2 when I played Magda, because it was Soul Ring, 2 mana. I can't remember, but it didn't matter going to the 7 treasures. That was just, if he blocks it, I can't let him kill my thing.
All right. Let's go to the one loss. Was it Yuriko or was it T and K?
T and K is actually what won this game.
Okay. So it's Yuriko, Ashling, T and K, and then you, Magda, in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing up the rear.
So this one was kind of felt like I was being a little bit more targeted this entire game by at least the Yuriko and the T and K player. Ashling had an interaction to respond with like hitting at least like 2 creatures in play at one point, and it could have removed the Mayhem Devil or the Valley Flood Color. And I was looking at him, I was like, look, man, if it makes you feel like 10 times better, I understand TNK is going to politic with you and tell you that the Mayhem Devil has to stay. And I was like, I totally agree with him. But you have to get rid of the Valley Flood Color. There's no reason why they should have access to non-creature instant speed, like sorceries and stuff, or just any of those spells. And he's like, well, I'm not really going to target any of the things on his field, and instead targets something from Yuriko and mine. And I'm just like, I have no idea what is going on here. And that's kind of like the things I expect from some players. I'm not going to think every player is on like that mindset where that is the current threat issue. I mean, it's also a deck, like he was also not worried because apparently Ashling, his deck can win on top of a Valley Flood Caller. And I was like, okay, sure, that's a fair point. No, it did not.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. You can't turn like Magda's differentiation factor is the fact that it can win on top, right? Mm-hmm. In a lot of cases, you don't turn T and K into the deck that can win on top because it has good cards.
It really did, and I want you to know he mulled. T and K mulled to like 3 or 4.
Yeah, no, that was insane.
And no, he mulled to he mulled to 4, and then he goes opens up gemstone. I was like, you're a ballsy person, you know. And he just drew all the right cards as the game started to progress. He mockingbirded my Magda, and I was like, okay, bud, you have 5 treasures, a mayhem devil. I'm surely locked out of this game.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I can't. And was this after they decided not to deal with their um um Valley Flood Caller, or was that okay?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Like the mayhem devil eventually left the game a little bit. He still had a Magda. That stuff ended up dying when Yuriko was like, well, I really don't want you to have like an activation. So he goes Deadly Erotic Magda on my end step, or on his end step, and then he goes, after that, that gives you one other creature left in play. I was like, yep, it does. And he goes, I'm gonna sack my Yuriko and Flare of Malice. And I was like, okay, man, whatever you want.
How did
So I got rid of it.
How did TNK end up winning?
So the Valley Flood Caller stuck somehow, because the Crom was the thing that got sacrificed to the Flare. And he had just an abundant. He still had so much mana because his Mockingbird made so many treasures from mine. And Ashley attempted to put a win attempt on the stack, trying to get rid of one of my things. And it was like this really weird spell that says like for every time you cast your commander, it makes copies of itself. So he's trying to repeat this repetitive loop where it keeps targeting the original. And I'm looking.
Fury Storm.
Yes, it's very, very weird. And I was like,
A
man,
very poorly made card.
Yeah, I looked at this hand. I was like, I don't know what the hell you want me to do against that. And I knew Blue Farm had the interaction. I was like, I know you have 3 pieces. And every time Ashley just kept refusing to pay, even though they had the mana to pay for the resources for heuristic study, they just refused to pay. And so it came to the point where Ashley now has all of their things on the stack. And then TNK goes, I'm going to crack my Ranger Captain of EOS. And I'm like, that's scary. So I attempt to return the favor of the activation. So now that he can't try to win on top, so we can just take this draw and go the heck home because it's round 5. And in response to me doing that, I glasses him again, and I'm like, he has an MBT, and I'm looking at your guy. I was like, do you have one more card to counter this thing? He's like, oh, dude. And I was like, oh god. And so he's able to MBT, Tainted Packs, finds Breach, and is able to breach on top of with instant speed with Valley Flood Caller, and just gets there after Chain of Vaporing my Grafdigger's Cage that's in play. And that's how we ended up losing the game.
Sounds miserable.
2v1s are not that good, but I mean, questionable plays throughout that game. I just took it with a grain of salt and I was ready for day 2.
So now we have
Day 2, the
round
last
6.
round. Yeah. So this was a win from Brandon. This is TNK, then Tim the Dargo, then Magda, then Marnius Calgar.
Oh, so this one should be a draw.
It's a draw?
Yeah, it's a draw.
All right.
So, coming into this game, so at this point, it's the final round of Swiss. I'm at 17 points and everyone else is at 16. So I'm like, I think a draw locks me up for top 4. Like, I feel pretty confident about that. Seat 1 also wanted a draw. I think he was on 16 points. But Tim Nadargo and Marnius both, I think they were on 11. Like, they needed wins to get in. So, like, we know we're not going to be able to get the draw. We're like, all right, we're going to play. I keep a hand. I think it's the first 7 where there's a Grafdigger's Cage, there's a Reb, and then a Metallic Mimic. That's what it was. So turn 1, I go Grafdigger's Cage. I think that like my thought of pod composition and how the game's going to play out, this locks down Tim Nadargo from being able to do the Dargo loops, at least for the time being. Then I'm seeing Blue Farm and Marnius, and I'm wondering how are these two going to play out. On my second turn, I play Metallic Mimic. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go Mimic on 2, Magda on 3, and I'm feeling pretty good. At this point, everyone else, before it gets to my turn 3, people are setting up draw engines. I don't remember exact orders, but at some point, all 3 players have like good draw engines. Timna Dargo's got Timna, Esper Sentinel, and 2/1 Orzhov that makes treasures when you cast a second spell. Lotho. And Marnius, Mockingbirds, the Lotho.
Oh,
so like
no.
they're all drawn cards. But before that all happens, and when Timna Dargo, it's I can't remember whose turn it was on. I think it was probably Blue Farm's turn, but he flashes in a Bowmaster and it eats my Mimic, and I'm just like, I hate this card. So I did have a bolt in hand because I remember that's how I ended up killing it. So I end up bolting or I don't do it that next turn because I'm like, I'm not going to play Magda. I've got 1 mana up. I've got a Reb. I'm just chilling. I know I've got bolt. So it goes through the turn cycles. I don't deal with the Ristic. At that point, I do reveal it to the table, but we kind of politic. And we're like, everyone's got the ability to draw. Don't get rid of the Ristic because then Timna Dargo is just going to eventually be able to outdraw everybody. I'm like, all right, it is what it is. I'm going to continue to leave 1 red mana up, showing that I've got the Reb, but they don't know what else I have. I had a Bottle Cap Blast and I had a Lightning Bolt. I had a lot of interaction, but Metallic Mimic was the only creature. So I bolt Bowmaster on Timna Dargo's end step at maybe a turn or two later. I play Magda, and I'm just kind of chilling. Like I don't feel really good about anything. They know I've got 1 piece of interaction. I'm letting the game play out, and I'm just thinking to myself, I'm gonna let this go, and I'm not gonna answer anything unless it's something that is going to like win the game. And I'm saying that like I'm saving this for like a Thassa. Like that's what I'm going to do. And they keep playing the game out. It gets to a point where I think Blue Farm, he's getting hit with just creatures. Like the Timna Dargo player did have, like a 5/5 Orc Mass. So he was taking damage. I don't remember if he tried to Naz or something, but he ends up getting killed from combat damage. So now it's just these two. And I'm just sitting there like this jerk off, and I know I've got Bottle Cap Blast in my hand, so I'm thinking like, is there a way I can steal this game? I just didn't see creatures. Like I didn't have any way to generate treasures like just naturally. So I'm sitting there I end up drawing a Pyroblast. So they know I have Reb, so I'm always going to telegraph the 1 red, but I'm saving the incremental treasures for Magda that I've got for a potential Pyro on top of the interaction that they save for the Reb.
Right.
And then I've got Bottle Cap Blast, and I'm like, this is my ticket to win the game. I'm going to sandbag this as long as I possibly can. And it finally gets to time where I'm like, if it comes back to me, it's on Timna Dargo. If it comes back to me, I think I can win this game. We're at like less than a minute left, and it's very clear that he's not going to pass the turn. I'm like, okay. Like at that point, I'm like, it is what it is. Marnius, time gets called. Marnius is able to crack a Born Upon the Wind. I'm pretty sure I need to to Reb this, but I say like my politicking is I'm gonna let you guys figure it out. Like I'm in one way or the other. You guys both need to win. I'm not gonna do anything unless it's a I win situation on the table. Tim Dargo doesn't like that, but again, he does his thing. He gets to a point where Marnius is fully tapped out. He does flash in like a fish, which was kind of weird, but he is tapped out. He has no mana. And then Timna Dargo plays Bergie. And I'm like, okay, so I have, and I think Timna Dargo was on like 1 black, 1 red mana at this point. So I'm like, I've got the Reb for whatever free mana spell Marnius might have, or like is hoping to draw, I guess, from fish. And then I'm asking myself, how does Timna Dargo win if he doesn't have Bergie? Because there was the Mockingbird was the Lotho on Marnius. My plan was Bottle Cap Blast the Lotho that gets me over 5 treasures, but I didn't have an artifact dwarf, so I wasn't going to be able to win on someone else's turn.
Right. And you weren't going to get
so. It wasn't going to get, time was already called. It wasn't getting my turn. So I pivoted from, instead of, like, I show the Bottle Cap Blast and I'm like, all right, instead of hitting this, like, I talked to Marnius. I'm like, we're going to lose the game. I'm not going to hit your thing, but I need your word that you're not going to try to jam the win. I will stop this if we all agree that this is just going to be a draw. And Marnius goes, yeah, I'm okay with that. I bottle cap blast the Bergie. The Tim Nadargo player is like really salty about it. He ends up making it in the top 16, so it all works out. But that was it. I was able to say I'm able to stop the win. I'm happy with the draw, and I end up finishing first in Swiss.
To lower their salt levels.
Yeah, he wasn't like super mad, but he was just like, "You're out of it. Why does it matter?" I'm like, "Bro, I still want the top 4." Like I played all 6 rounds of Swiss. I never had seat 1, but I also didn't have seat 4. So
Right.
I think I'm okay with that. Seat 2 and 3 are better than 4.
What was your placement?
Sorry for
Swiss.
number 1 overall, 18 points.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right, 5-3. All right. Last round for Jace. So Helga's winning it, I think.
Yeah, this
You
this
dashed
actually
her
pod was
hopes.
everybody's. This pod was actually everybody's winning in.
All right. So I'm assuming you disrupted Nagila.
Actually, that is not what I disrupted, and that is going to be the thing that you're probably going to not think that I disruptor fluted at one point. Najila had already assembled super good turn 1. They went like turn 1 Ragavan, just an LED land, whatever. Turn 2 they go EE into a Samut, crack the LED, Najila, and I'm like, oh my god, that's just a lot of draws, and they're essentially kind of back in the game. You know, Helga to Shauna Ties binder it. Uh, the game kind of goes into like a weird stalemate. I get my first activation, nobody stops it. It finds God's Pharaoh. You know,
Yeah.
like I'm not gonna find Portal to Phyrexia. Najila already has like 4 or 5 different warriors. It doesn't hurt the other Najila. And Helga is just sitting there, like at a weird, like, oh, now I can't do anything. The rest, like all of my creatures are 4 and up. And I'm like, great.
Sorry for
Now I just have to target 2 other players. The Najila who is third right after, or yeah, right before me, actually wish clawed, and him and Helga are both communicating at this point about what they should grab. And you know, they I think this is where I did find the God's Pharaoh statue. He puts the activation on the stack. I find God's Pharaoh statue because I assume that he's going to grab like a culling or a culling ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the card that I was most scared of that would have blown me out. And so he grabs swords and he's like, let me see your hand, you know, and he's like, I'm like, why? And he's like, well, it's either I target your Magda right now because we're scared, or I'll target the Najila. And I'm like, look, man, you're more than willing to see that I have a Portal to Phyrexia in my hand and a Liquid Metal Torque. I will promise you I will not cast this Liquid Metal Torque from my hand if you do not target this Magda. And he's like, Najila, let me see your hand, and then I'll target the Magda instead. Najila was like, I cannot give you that kind of information. And so I assumed Najila had a good grip.
Right.
And so, you know, he was like, well, after the whole discussion, doesn't even hit the Najila, he exiles the Samut. And that's the thing that ended up happening. Helga getting on their turn, they ended up finding Solitude off the yeah, with the Wish Claw talisman going through, giving it back to the Najila player to eventually just calling ritual me, and he's gonna like, I'm gonna pass the turn. Uh, goes to freaking Najila's turn, and I'm like, he's like, okay, now I'm gonna attempt to Solitude the Magda, and I'm like, I'll put an activation on the stack. I find Disruptor Flute, naming calling ritual, so now it costs 9 mana.
That's hilarious. You know,
Yeah,
I've done this before. I pulled out a Portal to Phyrexia, and someone wish clawed for a calling writ, and I said, great, I'm going to get a winter orb. So now you're off all your mana. So you're never casting that spell. Good job wasting your wish claw.
Mm-hmm. And so now he's just sitting here. He's like, dang, that sucks. Because he was going to attempt to hit and make treasures off with PFB. I was like, I'll respond. I'll slice the PFB. Now you're off. Even now you can't just culling ritual me here. And that gave me the advantage with the Magda, the Horde Master, to just like slowly after my Magda did get hit from the Solitude with like unlicensed hearse and glasses and the volatile vault, I was able to make 3 treasures or 1 treasure in each of their turns to essentially just kind of get there on every time I would get to me. But every time I would get to me, the third Najila would silence me, And I'm like, okay, that kind of sucks. Now I can't play the game. Goes another turn cycle, nothing crazy happens. Helga goes, I'm gonna Orm's Chant kicker you, and I'm like, brother, give me a turn here. After he Orm's Chanted kicked me, it went to the turn order in Nagila's, and I was so scared that this man was gonna win. The only 5-color deck I've ever seen with no source of blue mana. He summoners packed. He's looking. He's like, man, if I drew an island or anything here, I would have won the game. And I'm like, hell yeah, bro. Sometimes we get super lucky there. You know, Helga, after he doesn't win, Helga just passes. Najila goes, I'll just brain freeze you for 3. And I'm like, for 3? And that's your last turn? So goes my turn. Time's called. I top deck roaming throw. And I was like, I didn't even need you, but you're a great draw.
That's
so I
great.
go 4 mana, cast Magda. Then I go roaming throw. And he's like, they're like, do you just have it here? I was like, yeah, man. Yeah, I do. And so they just watched as I won on time. And that's how Disruptor Flute and the Horde Master being able to trigger just getting me enough treasures got me there.
I've played. I think I've drawn Magda the Horde Master like twice ever. Just so
Same.
It's such a good card. So this is like the tempo. Just like, you know, I find like identifying when you just can kneecap someone at the opportune moment to be particularly valuable. So this game this win speaks to me. This is that's my way of playing Magda, so I like that. All right, semifinals.
They're both in
Boo
the
this
same
game.
pod.
Womp
Boo this
womp.
game. Boo
Hey,
this game.
dude, all right. So this is what's interesting about and we can James, you can step in at any point. Um, my I remember I kept a really slow hand, thinking this is not going to be a quick game. And again, my idea being I want to let him set his board up before I set up mine. So I kept a hand with Adaptive Automaton, Agatha Soul Cauldron, a Lightning Bolt, and I'm thinking like I'm probably going to use this bolt on Kinnan if it comes out on 1, or if for some reason he plays Magda, like I'm going to bolt it. Just whatever, Kinnan or Magda, I'm bolting one of them before it gets back to my turn. And then I'm going to play Soul Cauldron and I'm going to kind of like do my thing. But so like I think Jason, I don't want to speak for him, but I feel like we both play a game of chicken a little bit. And then Kinnan plays Sylvan, I don't know how to pronounce the card.
Caryatid?
Caryatid, yeah. So he plays that, and I'm like, all right, well, that's a weird card to play. And I'm sitting there looking, and like, I don't remember if it was like right after he plays that, but I remember saying something to the table, and I'm like, I'm worried about what comes after Kinnan, because he had like got some like mana ramp as well, or had something where he was going to be able to like play something big following a Kinnan. And I think Jace is like, it could just be a Basalt. And I'm like, yeah, we're probably in trouble. Like, and it was so interesting because I think he was, I don't want to say he was newer, but he calls the judge and he asks to like walk over, and like alarms are just ringing right now in my head, and I'm like, he just played a hexproof, mana dork. He's got excess mana. He's going into Kinnan, and he's asking for clarification on something he's trying to do. We're in like this isn't good. I had no idea what it was, but I could tell that something was up. So Grixis does his thing. On my turn, I play Adaptive Automaton. I have no treasures at this point. I have a Soul Cauldron, which I've been eating a land and an irrelevant spell. One Automaton, no treasures. I pass into Jace. I'll let him tell his side, and then Kenan goes to his turn.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
on yeah, you want to step in?
Yeah. My turn. My turn one was land vault. So I was able to just set up a little bit more extra mana because I also didn't want to run into Brandon being able to just throw me off going into my creatures. Turn 2, I pretty much just played a 1-drop dwarf, passed the turn. Turn 3 is when I assembled being able to cast Magda and a crew effect, just being able to give me the amount of mana that I need. I'm pretty sure my vehicle was the one that whenever it becomes a creature now is an arcane signet essentially,
High speed,
which is the one I had.
not high speed.
High speed hover bike.
Flywheel
Not
Racer.
Flywheel Racer, yeah.
Sorry, I got you there.
So that was
You
my
did.
turn, and I felt pretty good with that, and I obviously knew that Brandon had something hella funky on his side to try and interact with me. So I was like, I'm not that threatened. I mean, if he hurts me, he hurts me. I have the mana. I'll just try again another turn. Going into Kinnon's turn was the red flag that I knew was going to be coming up because Brandon and I was like, we were discussing. I was like, this is better than Paradise Druid, and I was like, wait, this is way better than Paradise Druid because this is just an infinite loop somehow. Then that Freed to the Real comes onto the stack after the Kinnon had already resolved, and they were just like,
Uncounterable, Kinnon. You're right.
oh yeah, dude, an uncounterable Kinnon. You know, we're looking at Grixis Pirates. I was like, you know, he already molded to 5. This man did not have a single piece of good interaction. I asked him, I was like, man, do you really have nothing? I was like, if we all stop him here, can I see your hand? He showed me his hand. And I was like, he has Adnaz, freaking Braids, Mayhem Devil, others, Phyrexian Metamorph. I was like,
Yep.
this is just a cracked value hand. And, you know, Brandon has nothing besides a Lightning Bolt, and that'll just not stop it here. So I have Debauch Trickery. I didn't want to burn it through there. So I Debauch Trickery. He, in response, taps the little defender dude for double blue, taps his
Carried.
vault. Yeah. And then he goes hard cast Force of Negation.
Damn.
I think that's where Brandon goes, put a lightning bolt on the stack, targeting the thing. And I was like, the bolt doesn't get us there. And if the Freed from the Real sticks, it's just every time Kinnon comes into play, it's a red flag. So I go sack my crappy dwarf to Flare of Duplication, copy the Force of Negation, hoping it resolves. It resolves, copy Force, targeting Freed from the Real. So I burnt up 2 pieces of interaction. The Freed from the Real gets exiled, the Lightning Bolt hits the Kinnon. And now it's going to Grixis' Pirates' turn. And, you know, he had this pirate thing that if it taps, deals 1 to each opponent, and then whenever you cast a pirate, it untaps itself.
Yeah,
So he
05 creature.
Yeah, he casts Malcolm, activates it, or he activates it with the effect on the stack to untap it, makes 3 treasures, and he's looking at me. He's like, "Do I play Mayhem Devil or Braids?" And I'm like, "It really depends on what's in Brandon's hand." And Brandon shows him his hand.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to this is what happened specifically because I remember feeling like I was getting gaslit a little bit because at this point I've played against all 3 of these opponents in Swiss, and the Grixis Pirates player was really salty. He was the one that gave the newer player the advice to deluge the Magus. And he felt like I was being disingenuous about my tutor target when I never promised that I was getting anything. You know, so he was really like in his feels a little bit, and he goes, "Should I be worried about him?" And I look at my board, and I understand he's still salty, but looking at my board, and I'm like, I have no treasures. I'm like, I'm gonna play Magda next turn. I have a land that can tap Magda. I can get to 2 treasures. I'm like, bro, my hand is so bad. I take it, and so this is like some tech that I don't know that the head judge was watching the game, and he did say, I've never seen anyone do that before. I don't even know if you're allowed to do that. But I told him, I was like, I've done it one other time. I take my hand, I spread out the 4 cards, I cover what the cards are, and I show it upside down to say, I have nothing. I've got 2 lands, a creature, and 1 artifact, and it's Mirror of the Forebearers. But I didn't want him to know that I was just completely out of it. So it was Gimli, Mirror of the Forebearers, Mycosynth Gardens, and then just another land. I think it was Gemstone Caverns. It was pretty bad. I'm hurting. I think what my turn would have looked like would be play Gimli, then play Magda. You know, give Gimli a +1 and +1 counter. I've got Soul Cauldron on the board, so I've got things, but definitely not that turn. I'm like, so dude, I can get to 2 treasures. You got nothing to worry about. I'm pretty sure I kept a really bad 7. So he goes, all right. He plays Braids. He gives everyone an opportunity to sack a land. We don't. He draws 3 more cards, and I know at this point I'm like, yeah, it'd be great if I got another turn, but we're not going to get another turn. Like Grixis, he stands the most to gain. Kinnon's out of it. He tried his win attempt, and I told him, I'm like, what he did with 2 mono red players and a Grixis that went to 5, he did absolutely the right thing. Kinnon should have won the game, in my mind, because Jace was the MVP really of this round of having Tibalt's with Flare, because that was nuts. But understanding the pod composition, no one else was going to have answers for that. That was a crazy win that he had.
Mhm.
But after the dust settles, like my hand's not fast enough. Jace has dumped his interaction. Kinnan blew his load trying to win. Grixis establishes this crazy board with all these treasures, and he's drawing a ton. And I'm like, he's just gonna win the game. So it gets to my turn, and I will never forget this because there was a guy like right over my shoulder. I draw the card for turn, and it's Clock of Omens, and like immediately I just heard like a gasp like in my ear, and I'm looking in my here are my lands because I'll never forget how lucky I knew that I was. It was Ancient Tomb, Holdout Settlement, or sorry, 2 mountains because I needed that to cast Magda, Ancient Tomb, and Holdout Settlement. So I go 2 mountains, tap, cast Magda, use Holdout Settlement, tap Magda for a red, creating a treasure, pay the 2 for Ancient Tomb, sack the treasure, 4 mana, put Clock of Omens on the battlefield,
So, yeah,
and
we're
then
talking about clock.
everyone looks and they're like, "You're kidding me right now. Did you just win the game?" And like I look and I'm like, "Priority, priority, are we good?" And they're
Don't
like,
be looking at me.
everyone's just like kind of like no one can. Everyone's in disbelief, honestly. Literally me myself. Like when I played the card, I'm going, "There's no way I win here, right?" And no one had anything. I thought Grixis would probably have like drawn something from braids or because he had treasures. He just didn't have the interaction. So I go like tap tap. Like the Kinnan player is like, how does he win right here? And I'm like, oh, we're cooking, guy. Like we got clock, we got automaton, we're making treasures, we're good. So I was like over the moon. Could not be like any luckier than that. Was nothing to do with skill. It was just simply luck. That's
Art
all I
of
got
the
to say about it.
cards.
Literally,
know,
Yu-Gi-Oh moment.
Yeah.
dude.
I literally
Literally.
sat there and I was like, my round 6 top deck draw is this man's semifinals draw.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, it's a thing, man. You almost never hardcast Clock of Omens, but it turns out like, and this is gonna go back. I'm not gonna say like, oh, this is like I won because of like deck building philosophy, but I did bring every single artifact dwarf with the exception of Proteus Machine, for that reason, so that if I get one card, one activation, you can just win the game. And that's essentially what happened. Obviously, off of a draw, which was just purely luck, but that was the intention, right? I would have the artifact dwarf already on the battlefield.
Yeah, it was a good game.
All right.
Oh, it was a great game.
Let's go to the last one.
Finals pod.
Yeah.
All right. So this is I text show when this is happening because I'm like him and I had we met in the December tournament like in person and we went back and forth around like some different ideas with decks and whatnot and I'm like I need an outside like a person that plays Magda that like can give me some like just thoughts. So I text him and I also text my one of my buddies back home. And I'm like, all right, these are the decks so far. At this point, we don't know that Grixis Pirates is in, but we know Glarb and we know Malkin Kedis. So I'm reading the Glarb Doomsday primer, kind of getting an idea of what it does. I'm telling myself like Grafdigger's Cage is probably good here. Glarb's not the fastest deck in the world. But once Grixis Pirates is the fourth and final deck, my buddy texts me and he goes, "You're seat 1 in a pod with 3 decks that have imperfect answers." He's like, "Just jam it, win the game. That's it." And up to this point, like I know that I've almost played everybody in the finals in Swiss, like with the exception of Grixis Pirates and Glarb. I played everybody else. Like the Malcolm Kedis player is the guy that I beat with the Great Train Heist. Like so people know what the deck does, but they also know that I'm on a Staxier version. So in my mind, I'm thinking their plan going into Mulligans is I've got to be prepared for an early stacks piece and to be able to play around that. My hand was just 2 lands, 4 creatures, and 1 artifact, and that was it. And I think it was a great example of like, I didn't play any game the way I played the final game. And I think because I played it such a different way than I played the previous 7 rounds, no one expected that. So I go turn 1, Ancient Tomb, Metallic Mimic, pass. Everyone kind of does their thing. They're moving pretty slow. And I'm like, all right, like at this point, I play a mountain on the next turn. And like my big thought process here is like, what does my mana sequencing look like? I've got Plundering Barbarian with the ability of maybe taking Grixis or Kedis off of a Mox Amber. I could just generate a treasure. I've got Axeguard, and then I got Magda. And it's like, I don't really like any of those answers because I wasted mana. So I end up playing Magda, and I eat the 1 mana, just not having anything. So I get in for Magda gets a counter, which feels great. Get in for 1 treasure, pass. Kedis went to 4. Malcolm Kedis, I think he went to 4. So I'm like, he's not really doing anything. Glarb is like setting up. I think he plays he plays something early. I don't think he played Sensei's top at this point in the game, but he does get Sensei's top on the board. Then he gets Glarb on turn 3. And then Grixis is like doing Grixis things. She's got Mox Amber, she has Styron Storm Tamer, and then she does get Malcolm out, all on curve. So my turn 3, I've got Metallic Mimic, I've got Magda. I play Axeguard Cavalry and Mirror of the Forebears, and I get in. I'm at 3 treasures. So we go through. Glarb gets casted. He does his thing. I think Malcolm gets casted. And then Grixis gets Malcolm. Like she's got Malcolm Storm Tamer, and she's like trying to do some stuff. It goes to my turn, and I'm going, all right, no one has interacted to this point. I'm like, I'm going to cast Plundering Barbarian, make the treasure. I think that gets me to 4. Tap Axeguard, give Plundering Barbarian haste. I don't touch Mirror of the Forebears at this point. I'm like, all right, I've got 5 on the stack. No one responds to 5. And I'm like, this is interesting. Either they don't have an answer, or I should be worried about like an oppo from someone on that side of the table. I think Glarb had only had like two mana open. And then Grixis did have 2 and a fetch.
I don't even know if Glarb runs Dark Ring.
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I've never played against the deck. I just know it was Doomsday. And that was pretty much it. So I go to combat. I attack the Malcolm Kedis player. I split it. I attack Malcolm Kedis with I can't remember what it was. I split the attackers because I'm like, he's not going to trade. He's so far behind. And then I made it so that the attacks to the Grixis pirate player, like she's not going to block because her stuff gets eaten by I think the Plundering Barbarians at 3/3 or 4/3 at this point. Like it didn't make sense for the trades. So I get to 8 treasures and I pass. It goes to Malcolm. Glarb does his thing. He because I don't activate at this point. And so Glarb plays his turn, and then Glarb goes to pass. When Glarb passes, Grixis pirate fetches. When she fetches, I immediately wasn't even thinking. She goes, "I'm gonna fetch," and I go, "In response, I'm gonna activate." Because I'm like, she's on 2 mana. If I get Bowmastered, if I get like removal, I don't care because the piece that I was talking with my buddy before the game was like Portal of Phyrexia will be the like powerhouse card in this matchup, right? If you don't just win it. So I'm like, I'm gonna activate. I'm getting Portal no matter what, because even if she kills Magda, I still have like this crazy board. I've got Mirror of the Forebears like as backup, etc. So in response to the activation, I don't know if Glarb did Psych Rift first, but I do know that he does this Legolas Quick Reflexes.
That's yeah.
Yeah. I think he does that first actually, because I'm like, okay, I can't respond to that. Like you do it, no problem, you got it. So then I get Portal. I basically blow everyone back to the Stone Age. It goes to my turn, so that's Grixis Pirate's turn. She gets her land. She I can't remember exactly what she does, but essentially nothing. It goes to my turn. I'm like, I'm gonna use Portal to grab Siren Storm Tamer, recast Magda, and I'm like, tap, give Magda haste. We're gonna go to combat. And I get maybe it was before combat. Yeah, so before combat, I'm not at. I think I'm on 4 treasures at this point. I can't remember, but Glarb tries to Psych Rift, which in response to his Psych Rift, I activate Mirror of the Forebears, copy Magda, and I'm like, okay, Psych Rift resolves, bounce Magda, and I've got a metallic, I've got a artifact Magda. So I'm like, all right, are we good to go to combat?
Wait a second. State-based have killed her?
Oh, that's right. Sorry, I take it back. I apologize. Magda does, and that's how in my final picture that I take, Magda is in the command zone. You're right, but I choose to sack Magda that was being targeted by the Psych Rift.
Yep.
So that's how it plays out. You're correct. So then I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go to combat. Because Siren Storm Tamer's on the battlefield, the Malcolm Kedis player only has Otawara in hand. I don't know that yet, but I do have protection. So I've got the treasures to pay the blue mana to activate Siren Storm Tamer. So I go to combat, I get all my treasures, and I go, I'm going to activate. Grab clock, put the clock on the battlefield, and I go, tap, target, untap. And he goes, I'll show you an Otawara. And I'm like, all right, I've got 3 treasures. I go, tap, untap. And like, I look around the table because I'm thinking to myself, disbelief still is like, I don't think I've got it at this point. I'm like, I'm still expecting to have to fight a little bit. I haven't, I still had some stuff I could do. And I look and I'm like, all right, so Kedis is tapped out. That's what he had. I'm like, Glarb is good. And I look over at Grixis and I'm like, do you got something? And she looks at me and she's like, no. And I just put my hands out, handshakes. And I'm like, I could not believe it. It worked. I got the game just from creatures, tapping them through combat and getting there. So it was a crazy moment. Also because going in, I'm going to go backwards for a second. Before the game, top 4 offers to split. I've always split top 4 prize support because I'm like, the money's great. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to not play for the money. But I feel like your odds of winning a CEDH match are statistically unlikely, right? You're more likely to lose than you are to win. So I'm like, the prize support was $3,400 for first place and then $1,000 for everyone else for second through fourth. And it was either that or take the 1,600. And I'm like, 1,600 sounds really good right now. Like, I'm going to take it. Seat 4 is actually the one that ultimately ended up saying she didn't want to split. So when I win, I'm like, I'm excited that I'm winning. And then it hits me that I also made more than twice what I was thinking I was going to make. So I was just giddy the rest of the day. I could not have
yeah, dude, of course.
Could not have been happier for the longest time since I've been playing Magic CDH. I couldn't get past 3 wins. I couldn't get through the hump of Final 4, and I finally got there.
So what I'm hearing is you're commissioning the next playmat.
Yeah. Dude, it's I was just so happy. I felt like I've put so much work into I've read the Magdanomicon more times than I care to admit. I've played my sideboard, my buddies give me a hard time for it, is a cleared box of almost every possible card that you can play in Magda, and I've run most of the pieces through different steps. So I finally felt like this was a tournament where I came in with a plan. I had a deck list that I was happy with, and I didn't even I hadn't taken the time to sit and go I won, that was great, but I was I also didn't lose a game, which was just also crazy to me for only playing CDH in August. So I felt like that was finally the culmination of all this hard work and reading and watching videos and playing games. So it was a great moment, and I really just could not have asked for a better weekend.
So realistically, this is the first time Magda has won a tournament since Papa Squats.
Yeah.
It was a relatively big tournament. 128 something players, right?
Yeah, so, and that's what it was a little weird because I expected it to be bigger, but there were 2 different 10Ks taking place the same day. Both had 128 and 129 players.
But you went undefeated. So the only other time that happened was when Magda was still considered basically a rogue deck.
So,
can
you please go tell Koibito that Budo was wrong?
What was he wrong about? I don't. Sean and I talked a little bit about it, but I don't necessarily understand.
No, it's literally a joke. I'm just so happy that we have another example of Magda just absolutely slapping, without it being just straight up Brewer's advantage. I don't know how Magda wins, kind of thing. Everyone knows how Magda wins these days. Everyone's over respecting Magda, and yet still you it's solid play and heart of the cards.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of luck involved. Like I always say it's better to be lucky than good, but like you still have to make the right
The correct
decisions.
decisions.
Yeah,
You
no,
gotta
you have
you gotta put yourself in the statistically the best position to be successful. And then yeah, a little bit of luck, of course, playing 8 rounds and um, not losing a game. Of course, luck is going to be involved. So I don't like take this as I always say like I'm not a good CDH player, but I feel like I'm good with Magda because I play like Blue Farm and some other stuff when we're just like hanging out with buddies at at someone's house.
Yep.
I'm awful. Like it's objectively bad with other decks, but with Magda, I just feel really comfortable with
it's good.
the way the deck plays.
Man, very very happy for you. That was a fun listen. The final pod. All right.
So we have one more slide, right?
Yep.
But a majority of this stuff we've already covered, right?
Yeah.
So now I'll cut you off and go.
Go
Now
for it.
that Aether Drift is coming out, how do you think your deck list change is moving forward? Because being in that like hard stacks version when we're getting cards that just sort of like help us win,
Yeah.
is a little counterproductive, it
Mm-hmm.
seems. But like, what are your takes on that?
Yeah. So interesting enough, I think the only thing that I had like agreed to be the truth, like I think time will tell if like Stride Hanger is that good of a card for Magda.
We'll
Everyone knows
see.
Life Crafter will be a
Yes.
absolute staple, like the way Bark Form is.
Mhm.
All the other stuff, I'm not fully convinced. Like I'm gonna jam Stride Hanger this weekend. But like the Flash vehicle, it's great that it's Flash, but like the ability, like I don't want to chump a dwarf. Like it's
No.
nice to eat someone's thing, but like I don't want to chump it to like so I'm not convinced that there's a ton of cards other than Life Crafter. So let's using that thought process that Life Crafter is the pivotal staple from the set. What that means for me is that I'm going to go up a number of vehicles, and I'm likely going to cut some creatures. Um, and I think we have already talked about this before, but like I'm also going to come off of some of the harder stacks pieces. I'm taking Mycosynth Lattice out, but I'm going to keep Karn in because Stride Hanger I think gives me the potential to be able to have blockers to keep Karn up. It's not going to be ideal. This is really just a testing thing to see how I
Sure.
think the card plays. But I'm definitely going to go with vehicles. I've got the deck that I'm going to be playing this Saturday in front of me right now. I'm on 8 right now. Clown Car, Hearse, Flywheel, Smuggler's Copter, High Speed, Mobile Garrison, Life Crafter, and Sky Sovereign. So those are going to be the 8 vehicles I'm on. I think it's somewhere between 6 and 8 is probably the right number. But after that, like I'm still keeping a majority of the stacks package in the deck.
Sure.
I'm just trying to cut the high CMC stacks pieces and really like Uba's Mask is probably on the cutting block. It's still sleeved up right now, but probably gonna get rid of that. But just going really really quickly, Chalice is gonna stay. Cage, Dampening Sphere, Sphere and Thorn. I added Torp Orb back. Agatha's is gonna stay. Tangle Wire is gonna stay, and then that's pretty much it. It's a pretty lean stacks package. I don't count Godsphere on Portal. Like those are just tutor targets. Um, but as far as like the stacks package is going to stay, it's all 1 and 2 CMC pieces that I can play on turn 1 or 2, and then Tangle Wire is like the card that I only play if it makes sense, which is basically just early and I have 1 or 2 creatures on the board because that can just win you the game as well. But Tangle Wire is another card where there's often times where I'm like, I just want to cut this card. But
Yeah.
turn 3, if you've got Workshop and I've got a Magda and a Dwarf, turn 1 Dwarf, turn 2 Magda, turn 3 I play, Workshop or something. Like I'll slam a Tangle Wire if it makes sense. But again, it's on the chopping block.
I think you've sold me on City of Traders because it does accelerate you into
Yes.
many of your pieces, stacks or otherwise. And I think I'm going up 1 artifact. And with Stride Hanger, it's comboing with Fomori Vault, and I'm liking having more artifacts in general. But Mishra's seems to it collides with my want to hold up mana for a
I
high
don't.
stack
I don't think
interaction.
I don't think it fits in a mid-range build.
Or
Agreed. I
yeah,
completely agree with that. You need access to red mana more so in mid range than I think a lot of other builds of Magda. Um, but like I'll tell you right now, how do you feel about a turn one Lifecraft engine? Like probably pretty good, right? Like those. I'm not saying it's magical Christmas land, but like this deck was purposely built with a lot of 3 CMC pieces, like whether it's Relic of Legends or like the some of the stacks pieces as well, but also like an adaptive automaton on one's not bad. So it's never perfect. There's plenty of times where like sequencing lands with workshop is awkward, but the payoff I think is worth it compared to the cost. And I also run Mox Diamond, so like if I need to pitch workshop to play the diamond, I will. Like that's not necessarily an issue if it doesn't make sense with the hand. But to your point about City of Traders, it's a little difficult because you've got to figure out like sequencing. Again, you never play City of Traders on one, but there's times where you'll play it on two because a mountain and a City of Traders is 3 mana on two, and then you go into turn three, and then all of a sudden you've got 4 mana with only 2 lands after the fact. But that's enough sometimes. Like we're not drawing a ton of cards, and that can let us get like our engine and our pieces out. So I think City of Traders is should probably be a staple for the deck, but I understand if people don't like it. But that and Ancient Tomb just were so clutch throughout the tournament where I was just able to play things where I really shouldn't be able to play them, and it doesn't cost me the card advantage of like pitching a Simian Spirit Guide or pitching a card to Chrome Box that like I already like my interaction so much that I don't tend to want to get rid of it. Like, and I want my creatures as well. So I got rid of all those like the fast mana pieces with the exception of Mox Amber and Mox Diamond. Um, and I think it's worked out really well for me. I think people want to play Chrome Mox because it's safe. Same with Spirit Guide and Lotus Petal, but I don't know that it is the right haul necessarily, unless you're on maybe that more mid-rangey build where you need the red and you want to be able to play spells.
we're considering dropping Lotus Petal and
At least I am. It's something that I brought up after
Yeah.
talking to you a little bit. Is like it depends on how you want to play the deck. Like,
Mhm.
do you actually need that mana that early? In a lot of these cases where like the deck is just playing on curve. Um,
Exactly.
it-
Yeah. Yeah.
to answer your question though, do I want to go turn one Lifecraft engine where it's specifically from Mutual's Workshop? The answer is no. I think that telegraphs you as being a threat way too much to the point where like you might even get your Magda Force willed.
Yeah. I mean, I told you that that's happened without that, but
Right. But
um,
like
you're right. I mean, you're right. But it's more so like any of those like playing a 3 CMC artifact on turn one is inherently unfair. Like you shouldn't be able to do that. Yeah, maybe it's not like Lifecraft Engine, but like playing Adaptive Automaton on one or playing like being able to play two there's been plenty of times where I've played like a workshop. I'll play like a 1 mana piece and then I'll follow it up with a Sphere of Resistance, which like sounds crazy, but like it depends on the pod, and again, really deck building choices. But I think the ability to be able to play a rather high density of 3 CMC cards, because I was on 15 3 CMC cards. They're not all artifacts, but most of them were. There's a handful of creatures as well at that spot, but it's worked out more for me than it hasn't. But it certainly comes with drawbacks.
right.
Cost of wanting to have a stacks piece on turn one or turn two, I think.
yeah.
I think it gives you slightly more opportunities to get those, but realistically, like even on curve, it's very strong. And like the situations where you really want it on turn one is kind of like when you're going into a situation where like when you're early in turn order.
Mm-hmm.
Um, similar to playing out your Chalice of the Void. Because if you're not super early in turn order, it doesn't have as big of an effect. It still has an effect, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Like because turn one stacks piece turn 2 you need to have something. Like the hands that you need to have where Workshop lends itself to doing its thing as well as possible are extremely rare. Like
Early.
mathematically.
Yeah,
Yes.
early. I certainly agree. But I'll tell you right now, I can think of 3 separate instances where I've hard casted Portal to Phyrexia, and obviously this is not ideal,
Sure.
but every single time it's because I had Workshop. There's been times where I've played God's Pharaoh statue from hand. Like these dead cards, I've really tried to remove. Like I got rid of Spine. I got rid of a lot of like cards that I don't want sitting in my hand, like the high CMC cards. Um, the only reason I played the ones I did play was like I've got the ability to play them at a much earlier in the game because of something like Workshop. And again, not that it always happens, but when it does, it feels really good. Like if you can play a God's Pharaoh statue on turn 3, it's like good luck. If you're just hard casting it. So it's not that it happens all the time, but it has happened enough times where I'm going. I think I chalk it up to a cost of deck building a hard stacks list.
I will say that I think it's fine when you consider it as a ritual toward the mid game. And there are going to be some very niche situations where it's usable early, but for the most part, like early game, it's more of a liability than it is anything else. And it's definitely something that like you want to see turn 3 or later, in a lot of situations.
Yeah, I do agree. It's not like the problems you'll run into, and when I've hated it the most is when you have a hand and you've got one red source and workshops your second card, and
Yep.
I'm like, this is bad. So you're right. I almost always want it to be my third land. And again, depending on what's in your hand, sometimes I will play it earlier if I think it makes sense. But you're right. You almost want it for like the turn 3 play where you can slam out a 5. Like I'm on Sky Sovereign. If you can play Sky Sovereign early, that's another like just crazy value engine that lets us deal with the most threatening cards in the game for us. So again, it's not that it needs to be played. I could probably cut it from the list and it'd be totally fine, but it saves you in some situations where cards would otherwise not be castable from your hand.
Sure. But we're also very much down on those cards. Right, like you
Yeah,
said,
that's fair. Yeah.
you removed a lot of them. So like if you weren't playing Sky Sovereign as an example, and your only 2 cards were going to be GPS and Portal to Phyrexia, like Portal to Phyrexia is almost still never castable with
Mm-hmm.
Workshop. Like it's very rare. Um, and that thing will get countered so fast. But uh, yeah, I mean I'm very much like a math sort of that dictates a lot of my deck building.
Yeah.
Um, so when math for Mox Diamond looks terrible, math for that look bad, but like again, this comes down to personal preference on what type of game plan you're looking to have and how you want to play the deck. Are you willing to sacrifice consistency for spiky hands,
Yeah.
even if they are like 1 in 200? Like it all depends on what you as a player really want to do. Um, I personally like the consistency a little more, but I completely understand also wanting to play for, you know, trying to make your opening hands as strong as possible, which
Mm-hmm.
is a little bit counterproductive with workshop specifically, like we just went over. But like that's a reason why you might want to play Mox Diamond is, I'm going to concede this is a dead card in the mid game, or unless I get wheeled. But
Mm-hmm.
um, in an early game situation, it might help in some like very specific hands where you can put it to really good use.
Yeah, I think the points that you've already made these points, but there's just something I'm going to bring up with box time that I don't think we have talked about. So looking at Mishra's Workshop as a ritual in a deck that doesn't have Petal, Simeon, Chrome Mox, I think, and it does have a high. Like I think I'm on 34 artifacts right now, so I have a lot of artifacts. So there's actually, I take it back. I've got more. I've got 34 soul artifacts, and then I've got all the artifact dwarves.
Right.
So if you're playing like workshop on 3, and all of a sudden you can get an artifact dwarf and have 2 more mana up to like do something else. That's super important on like turn 3, turn 4. So there's times where it's like it's not really about playing workshop on turn 1. Like that's almost always the wrong thing to do. But it does get you that ritual for essentially half my deck. For I mean not half of it, 40% of the deck.
40%. Yeah.
Yeah, 40% of the deck. So it's one of those things where I get it. I'm not going to argue that someone should or shouldn't play it, but the Mox Diamond, I asked you for the chart on the math on it. I understand from like a number of land standpoint and wanting to see the card in the hand. What I don't think the math accounts for is when I'm on 14 red sources from 29 lands, 14 sole red sources that I have access to, not like holdout and like gemstone and cavern and whatnot, but just dedicated pure red sources. Drawing, there's so many times where I will draw a hand where I get 2, like a holdout settlement and a volatile fault, and I'm like, well, this hand would be okay, but I don't have red. And like, there's been more than one occasion where I will keep a hand where it's 2 lands and a Mox Diamond, and I pitch 1 land, play the diamond, play the land, and I go, all right, I'm just going to hope I draw lands. I've got, essentially 29, 30 29 lands in the deck.
Your chance every turn for the first 2 turns. So turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 is approximately 25%.
Yeah,
each
it's
draw.
not. Yeah, it's not great. It's not great. I'm just telling, like, when you're, I'm not keeping that hand on my first 7, but like if you get to 6 and it's 2 lands and a Mox Diamond and you don't have access to red, I'm gonna keep that before I go to 5. Like if it makes sense. So that's happened before, and like always having that consistent access to red is something that I don't think the math necessarily accounts for. Not that it's wrong. You're right. It's probably
Well, I mean,
not the right choice.
it does technically account for it because it talks about like what lands you're hitting. There's another spreadsheet that I have that talks about like the chance of hitting 2 red and stuff like that. So that's not technically included in that picture.
Gotcha.
But like when you think about it, it's like, okay, well, if you're drawing 2 lands, what's the chance of those 2 lands actually being 2 red sources? Which
Yeah.
let me bring up that document real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Again,
Like it entirely depends on like how many lands you're on and all that stuff. So like,
yeah, it's totally fair. Like I think 29 lands is probably like on the higher side. So like
well,
I
on
really
29 lands, depending on how many red sources you're on, it's
Mhm.
approximately a 31.5% chance to have 2 red.
Yeah.
Versus like 2 colorless is 28.6, or in some cases 22.9.
Yeah.
So like 1 red, 1 colorless is way more common, and 2 red is more common than 2 colorless. But like, even if it's 25% of the time that you see 2 lands in your hand, it's still likely going to be colorless lands.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I like if you were like, hey, what's like something that frustrates you about the deck the most? It's the color. Like everyone just assumes you're on mono red, like, but we get so much utility from our lands that we really have to play a lot of these pieces.
Say
You're
that.
even on less of them because you're playing fetch lands over some of the utility.
Yeah. Yep.
We feel that burn a lot less than your build does, though. We made that intentional choice to feel the pinch way less, and we mulligan better because of it.
So here was the thing. I purposefully like for the reason why I went to 13 red, and that number is purposeful, was I was trying Winter Moon for a long time. I like Winter Moon is great in 3+ color pods, but like you get across from a Kinnan and it's like it just doesn't matter. Like it again, depending on how the game plays out. I don't want to speak in generalities, but like a 2-color deck just does not care, especially decks that have access to basic lands. They don't care. And I want stacks effects that, for the most part, affect everybody. I don't want one person to be able to get out from something. So I got off Winter Moon, but the reason I've continued to stay at 13 is the Arena of Glory, because there's been times, especially with like Gimli in the list, where if I do play an untapped Arena of Glory, you can get 2 hasty creatures out, and like that can be another like I
Gotcha
got you.
moment.
Like you're
Yeah.
not expecting that, and like I really value those like Arena of Glory, Great Train Heist like moments because people are always keeping track of the number. Like you said, like we're not surprising anybody at a table anymore. People are keeping track of how many treasures you have, how many you quote unquote will have next turn, and anything I can do to like mess that math up or like sneak a game out that I don't deserve or shouldn't have.
Right. No, I
I'm
got you.
I'm gonna look at that. So yeah, so that's why I'm on Arena of Glory as well, and that's why I've kept 13 mountains essentially. But yeah, I definitely feel the pinch on the rest of my mana base.
All right. James, do you have any final thoughts about anything? You're
I mean,
close. You got
yeah, you're good. I mean, with Aether Drifts coming up, I'm definitely probably gonna try like Burner Rocket and the Lifeform engine. I do just because I do enjoy triggering crimes a little bit more, especially with like the land package and fixing some of the cards that choices I didn't make over the weekend with some of the simple things that you guys did suggest. I think those cards will be very beneficial. Um, out of like things that I am currently maybe going to test on the side, I was thinking about like that Asturgo Entertainment Land, just for like the
Buried Ruin plus plus.
the one that exiles the yard, all yards, but I return like a historic permanent from the yard.
Yep.
So it's just like something cheeky I can find.
That also tap for a colored source with a 1
Yeah.
filter.
Yep. So that's just another one that I'm thinking about looking at. But there isn't really much that I would do into the deck besides just a little minor tweaks because I did like the entire event. I felt like my deck was super consistent with what it did. And I mean, the only bad draws were probably seeing like Portal Phyrexia in my hand, and that was just not it. So I know I saw some lists playing like, was it Nexus of Becoming?
Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting
it's
card.
I know.
an
It is a
interesting
very,
card, but
very interesting card. But that's why I said I was like, that's like the only thing. But that's just the downside of Magic. Sometimes you just draw the thing you don't want to see in your hand.
Yep, and that's why we go to 6 so we can put it on the bottom.
like the thing with Nexus is it's such a big risk when you draw the thing that you want to have in play unless it has an ETB effect. So unless you're like still on Spine or you're playing Portal to Phyrexia, like those things you can put out as creatures and exile the card, not have it be that big of a deal.
Oh yeah.
But if you have Clock of Omen stuck in hand, or if you have Masquerade Nexus stuck in hand, and then you're like, okay, this is my way to jam my other thing. It's like, well, now you're susceptible to creature removal, and if a token is bounced, then it's gone forever. Um,
Yep.
so there's huge risk behind playing that card outside of it just being like a way to make you some artifact dwarves or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, like I said, definitely interesting choice. The last card maybe would be Valakut Awakening, just to be able to pitch the hand any of the cards that I think I deem useless and being able to put like those big pieces back into the deck while drawing an additional card.
It's
It
something
being
some of us have tried, but the fact that the land header's tapped is like a huge downside.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not really a red source, and it's almost not really a land most of the time for purposes of calculating your opening hand. And you don't, and it's 3 mana, so it's not going to be doing anything. It just feels like almost every other card is better than it. The other MDFCs are really good. Like all of them are good. I mean, I'll say whatchamacallit is a crime for 3 mana, or 4 mana. Shatter Skull, not good, not even okay, kind of bad, but it can be pitched to Pyrokinesis, which is good. Run Pyrokinesis, very good card.
Yeah,
I
that is a
put
card I did not play in the list. That's a very good card.
I put Shatter Skull back in the list for the tournament that I played the other week, and it was the first time in like a year and a half where I actually got to use it for its like casting thing.
Y'all
And
doubt me on that.
I said the first time in a year and a half.
That's
So
okay.
yes,
It's a land the rest of the time. Who gives a shit about your life
doubt.
total? I know your play group has a Winota in it, so you have to care about your life total. That's just your locals. Um,
Tournaments is where I care.
yes, and you usually do not have to care about your life total in tournaments. So play Shatter Skull, get a crime, Anyway, it's 11:42. We've been going on for 3.5 hours. It's been a very good recollection. You guys had a lot better recall and a lot more details than I expected. Um, it still staggers me how much variety Magda can have. I still think she's the deepest deck in CDH with the most build choices one could possibly have because she is both mono red and mono brown, and uses weird card types, and you can go super deep. Um, but once again, congratulations on your win and your top placement. Um, Congratulations on going undefeated, Brandon.
Yeah, appreciate it.
And thank you both for being part of the community and hanging out and being so giving of your time to hopefully help other dwarves see the variability and the viability of those different options.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote this. I put this in the report, but like you just hit on the depth of card choices. Like people will tell you like this card's good, this card's bad, but everything really has to be taken in the context of what you're expecting to play or what you consistently do play against. And I'm not kidding when I say I tell my friends like my baby board is like 100 cards.
Yeah.
Like I can play any one of those cards at any given point, and like again, if it really it comes down to like deck building with like synergy of the different cards. But Magda is a toolbox deck, and if you're wanting to get better at it or play it more, start with what you're comfortable with. Like I did not jump into Magda and say I'm going to play stacks effects. I started playing like like everyone does with just a traditional stock list, and I ran into a ton of rock sign, a ton of turbo, and I saw the value of like sphere of resistance and some other things, and I went, I really like how that plays. I'm going to look for other synergies, and like I started sculpting a deck around like those things, and it worked really well for me in tournament settings. So like again, I got lucky through the event, but I also feel like a lot of it was I kind of set myself up to have a lot of the situations that I did find myself in, like turn one sphere, turn two Magus of the Moon. It's like, yeah, but like that was a deck building choice. Like, and
Right.
I mulligan and I look for those cards when I'm like, there's a reason show that I saw Sphere 3 or 4 times. It's a card when I'm shuffling up and I have it on a 6 and 7. I'm probably keeping it. Like, of course, if it makes sense, but like that's an effect that I really value as a player, and I don't think your traditional CDH player who hasn't experienced what it's like to try to win through that effect can do it very comfortably while also having to stop interaction from two other players.
It also takes a very specific type of pilot to be able to coach their opponents into not throwing the game.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, you like this is the thing that I think most players like everyone has to find like in terms of like just self-reflection and like how do you improve as a player, everyone has to find what their thing was. For me, I knew it was like not only understanding the meta, but like pod composition was what I identified as the thing that I wanted to get better at. So I watch like videos on YouTube of like how different decks will play. Not that it's the best thing, but like experience is the the thing that's going to trump everything. But a lot of players, it might be politicking, it might be having conversations. You might not be comfortable talking as much as someone else. Force yourself just a little bit here and there to start asking, like, hey, what are your thoughts? Like, just start to generate conversations, even if it's not politicking. Just ask questions, like, hey, what are your thoughts when you're doing that? What are you hoping to accomplish? Like little things that will help you become more comfortable with it, because Magda is a deck that you have to talk if you're going to be successful. You can't just play cards and say go. Like it doesn't. You can play Blue Farm that way maybe, but you cannot play Magda that way. And I think most players might say that they struggle with politicking. So just practice it. Um, whatever that looks like, and find a list that you're comfortable with, and yeah, just enjoy that. Don't feel like you have to play what someone else is saying is what's good.
Yep.
It's all
There's
you need context.
variability is also the only element of Brewer's advantage we have right now because Magda's such a known quantity. So keep trying things, keep being weird, keep having your secret tech that you steal a win with because that is exactly what tournament magic's all about. I think, James, do you have anything else you want to say before we sign off?
I mean, I just hope that every player, at least before you make any of your decisions, make the right plays, take a look around, and take your time. It's all a game. The whole point is to have fun.
Yep.
Very
And
true.
especially when you're not playing in tournament, ask if other players would have done things differently. Because sometimes a look from the outside in helps for people that don't play Magda, how they view things. That's what you need to understand more than anything else. But also, are either of you guys going to come to the 12K in August?
Where is it at?
Providence.
Rhode Island.
Yeah, I'm planning on it. I was supposed to be at the Royal Rumble, but I was out of the country, so I would like to come up to it.
All right. There will be T-shirts.
Definitely not. I'm sorry. I'm very active with my social life, and I try to just drive to the ones like within 10 hours, and Rhode Island's all the way on the other side of the world for me.
Yeah, you gotta
It's
find
only a
those
10-hour
those-
flight.
Gotta find those round trip flights, baby.
That's too far for me.
Fair enough, but all right. Well, have a good night, guys. Thanks for showing up.
You
Thanks
as
for
well.
your time.
Thank you for having us.
Congratulations again.
Thanks.
Thanks.